The warm glow of twilight bathed the rolling hills of the Shire in golden light as Frodo Baggins, a young hobbit of Bag End, ambled through the familiar pathways of his home. The air was fragrant with the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers, a blissful backdrop to his thoughts. He had always loved the Shire, a peaceful corner of Middle-earth where time seemed to stand still, but something felt different today. A whisper of adventure tinged the air as he approached his Uncle Bilbo's hobbit hole. He felt a flutter of excitement. Bilbo had been acting strangely lately, filled with a restless energy that had kept him awake at night. Frodo had often heard the tales of Bilbo's grand adventures from years past, the journey through the misty mountains, encounters with trolls, and the fateful meeting with a creature named Gollum. Those stories, once thrilling, had become mere echoes in the wind, but Frodo couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to unfold. Upon entering Bag End, Frodo was greeted by the sight of Bilbo rummaging through his belongings, a cluttered mix of old maps, trinkets, and dusty tomes. The old hobbit's eyes sparkled with mischief and mystery as he caught sight of Frodo. "Ah, my dear Frodo. Just the young fellow I wanted to see," Bilbo exclaimed, his voice brimming with an excited tone. "Come here, my boy, I have something for you." Curiosity piqued, Frodo followed Bilbo into the cozy study, where a single, elegantly crafted box lay atop the desk. Bilbo's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring nestled within a bed of soft velvet. The ring caught the fading sunlight, casting tiny glimmers that danced across the walls. "What is it, Uncle?" Frodo asked, unable to hide his intrigue. Bilbo's smile faded momentarily, replaced by a look of somber nostalgia. "This, Frodo, is something very special. It is a ring I found long ago, a ring of power, but I cannot quite explain its importance." He hesitated, his eyes drifting to the floor as if recalling distant memories. "It has been lost for many ages, and I believe it is time for it to find a new keeper. That keeper, my dear Frodo, is you." Frodo felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, a strange mix of excitement and foreboding. "Why me?" he asked, his voice a mere whisper. "Because," Bilbo replied, a hint of urgency in his voice, "I sense that you have a greater destiny ahead of you. This ring is not just a trinket, it carries a history, a burden. You must keep it safe and never lose it." Just as Frodo reached out to take the ring, a sudden chill swept through the room. The door creaked open, and in walked Gandalf the Grey, his long, grey beard flowing like a river down his chest. His piercing eyes scanned the room, landing on the ring in Frodo's palm. "Bilbo, what have you done?" Gandalf's voice was deep and commanding, filled with a gravity that made the hairs on Frodo's neck stand on end. He stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "That ring is far more dangerous than you realize." Bilbo frowned, his earlier excitement vanishing. "But it's just a ring. I've had it for years, and nothing ill has come of it." "Ah, but you do not understand, dear Bilbo," Gandalf replied, his tone softer yet firm. "This is the one ring, forged in the fires of Mount Doom by the Dark Lord Sauron himself. It has the power to corrupt and control the hearts of those who possess it." He turned to Frodo, his expression grave. You must understand the gravity of what you hold, Frodo. It must be destroyed, or it will consume you and everyone you love." Frodo's heart raced as he listened, the ring suddenly feeling heavy in his hand. Destroy it? But how? Where? "The journey will be perilous," Gandalf said, "but you are not alone. We will find a way. First, we must keep it safe and away from the eyes of Sauron." He stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Frodo's shoulder. "Do you understand?" Frodo nodded slowly, fear mixing with determination. He looked at the ring once more, feeling the weight of its history in the shadow of the darkness that lurked beyond the borders of his beloved Shire. "Very well," Frodo said, his voice steadying. "I will keep it safe." Gandalf smiled faintly, but his eyes remained troubled. "A wise choice, Frodo. But remember, this is only the beginning. The road ahead will be filled with trials and danger. You must prepare yourself, for the fate of Middle-earth may rest upon your shoulders." As twilight faded into night, Frodo clutched the ring tightly in his hand, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. He was no longer just a simple hobbit of the Shire, he was now bound to a quest that would change the fate of the world forever. The soft chirping of crickets filled the night air as Frodo sat by the hearth in Bag End, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Bilbo had retired for the evening, leaving Frodo with the weight of the ancient ring nestled in his pocket. Its presence was a constant reminder of the burden he now bore. He could feel its weight pressing against him, both a gift and a curse. The next morning, Gandalf had set out on his own journey, intent on uncovering the truth behind the ring. Frodo watched as the wise wizard left, his long cloak billowing behind him like a storm cloud. There was a tension in the air, a sense of urgency that sent a shiver down Frodo's spine. He sensed that something dark and powerful was stirring in the world beyond the Shire. Days turned into weeks, and Frodo tried to maintain the normalcy of his life. He worked in the garden, visited with friends, and celebrated the small joys of Hobbiton. Yet, the ring remained a constant weight on his heart, and the absence of Gandalf left him feeling uneasy. One evening, as Frodo sat at the window gazing out at the rolling hills, he heard a faint whispering on the wind. It was unlike anything he had experienced before, an ominous voice that seemed to call out to him, promising power and glory. Frodo shook his head, trying to dispel the unsettling feeling, but the whispers lingered in the back of his mind, haunting his thoughts. Meanwhile, far from the peaceful Shire, Gandalf had ventured deep into the heart of Middle-earth. He traveled to the ancient ruins of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood, where shadows clung to the trees like a shroud. The air was thick with an ancient malice that pressed upon him, a reminder of the darkness that had once reigned in these lands. As Gandalf approached the dark fortress, memories of battles fought long ago flashed through his mind. He recalled the last great alliance against Sauron and the final defeat that had cast the Dark Lord into the shadows. But now, he felt a stirring in the air, a pulse of malevolence that signaled Sauron's return. He entered Dol Guldur cautiously, his heart racing as he navigated the crumbling stone corridors. The whispers of long-lost souls echoed around him, and he could feel the oppressive weight of evil in the air. At the heart of the fortress, Gandalf discovered a hidden chamber where ancient texts lay scattered across the floor, their pages yellowed and worn. As he sifted through the texts, one in particular caught his eye, a record of the Dark Lord's return. The words spoke of the rise of the Nazgul, Sauron's most feared servants, who had begun to seek the ring, drawn to its power like moths to a flame. The wizard's heart sank as he realized that the Dark Lord was regaining his strength and influence, sending his minions out into the world to reclaim what was lost. Frodo, Gandalf muttered, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. The ring must be destroyed before it is too late. With renewed urgency, he left Dol Guldur and returned to the Shire, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the growing shadow. He knew he needed to warn Frodo, to prepare him for the journey ahead. As Gandalf approached Bag End, he found Frodo sitting outside, gazing up at the stars, lost in thought. The young hobbit looked up, startled, as Gandalf approached, his expression serious. "Frodo, we must talk," Gandalf said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "The darkness is returning to Middle-earth. Sauron's influence is growing stronger, and we have little time." Frodo's heart raced as he felt the weight of Gandalf's words settle over him like a storm cloud. "What do we do?" he asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. "We must prepare for a journey. You are no longer safe here. The ring has drawn the attention of dark forces, and they will stop at nothing to reclaim it," Gandalf replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if expecting shadows to emerge from the trees. "Where will we go?" Frodo questioned, his mind racing with possibilities. "To Rivendell, where Elrond can provide counsel and protection," Gandalf answered, a hint of determination in his voice. "But we must leave at once. Gather what you can, we will ride under the cover of night." Frodo stood, his heart pounding. He had always thought of the Shire as a safe haven, a place where danger was only a distant tale. But now, it felt as if the very ground beneath him was shifting, as if the world was teetering on the brink of something dark and malevolent. As he hurried inside to gather his things, Frodo felt the ring pulse against his chest, a reminder of the power and danger it represented. He had accepted the burden of keeping it safe, but now he understood that the true challenge lay ahead. The shadow of Sauron loomed over them, and the road to Rivendell was only the beginning of a journey fraught with peril. With Gandalf by his side, Frodo took a deep breath, steeling himself for the unknown. He would face the darkness, no matter the cost, for the fate of Middle-earth rested upon his small shoulders. The moon hung high in the sky as Frodo and Gandalf journeyed through the ancient paths leading to Rivendell, the last homely house. The trees loomed like sentinels on either side of them, their branches whispering secrets in the cool night air. Frodo felt both excitement and dread coursing through him. He was about to enter a world of wisdom and power far beyond his understanding. As they approached the elven city, its beauty took Frodo's breath away. The delicate architecture shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting a timeless grace. Waterfalls cascaded through lush gardens, and the sound of gentle music floated on the air. Yet, beneath the splendor lay an undercurrent of urgency. The darkness that threatened Middle-earth loomed ever closer. Gandalf led Frodo into the grand hall of Elrond, where the council was to be held. A long table of polished wood stretched before them, adorned with maps and scrolls detailing the lands of Middle-earth. The hall buzzed with murmurs as various representatives gathered: dwarves, elves, men, and even other hobbits who had journeyed from the far reaches of the Shire. Elrond, the wise and ageless Lord of Rivendell, presided over the gathering. His long hair flowed like silver in the soft light, and his piercing gaze held centuries of knowledge. As the last of the council members took their seats, silence fell over the assembly. Elrond raised his hand, and the room quieted, the anticipation palpable. "Welcome, my friends," he began, his voice calm yet resonant. "We gather today to discuss the fate of a great power that has returned to our world, the One Ring. It is a burden that must not fall into the wrong hands." Gandalf stepped forward, a grave expression on his face. "I have journeyed from the Shire with Frodo Baggins, the ring-bearer. The ring was lost for centuries, and it has found its way back into the hands of the innocent. But it is no ordinary ring, it is the One Ring, forged by Sauron in the fires of Mount Doom. Its power is corrupting, and it must be destroyed." A murmur rippled through the council members. Boromir, a nobleman of Gondor, spoke up, his voice firm. "If we could harness its power, we could use it against Sauron. We must not be so quick to cast it away." "No," came a sharp reply from Legolas, the elven prince, his eyes flashing with intensity. "The ring corrupts all who seek to wield it. We must not fall into the trap of believing we can control its power." Gimli, the stout dwarf, nodded in agreement with Legolas. "I say let the ring be destroyed. It is a menace that threatens our very existence." As the debate escalated, voices raised and passions flared, Frodo felt a swell of anxiety. He glanced at Gandalf, who stood resolutely at the table's edge, his gaze steady and unwavering. The council continued to argue, fear and ambition battling for dominance. Finally, Elrond called for order, his voice cutting through the din. "Enough. We are here to protect Middle-earth, not to argue amongst ourselves. The fate of the ring lies in our hands. Who will take the burden of this task? Who will take the ring to Mount Doom and destroy it?" Silence fell over the hall. Frodo's heart raced as all eyes turned to him, the weight of their expectations settling heavily on his shoulders. "I will take it," Frodo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Though I do not know the way." The council members exchanged glances, some skeptical, others impressed by the bravery of the young hobbit. "Your courage is commendable, Frodo," Elrond said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "But you will not carry this burden alone. Who among us will accompany Frodo on this perilous journey?" Aragorn, the ranger with a mysterious past, stepped forward, his presence commanding respect. "I will go with him. I have sworn to protect the Shire, and I will not let this young hobbit face the darkness alone." Legolas and Gimli exchanged glances, then nodded. "We will join as well," Legolas declared. "Together, we stand a better chance against Sauron's forces." Boromir, still conflicted, hesitated before speaking. "I too will accompany you. The fate of my people hangs in the balance, and if we are to challenge Sauron, we must unite." With each declaration, the sense of camaraderie grew stronger, binding them together in their shared purpose. One by one, the council members offered their support until a fellowship was forged, an alliance determined to see the quest through. Elrond nodded approvingly. "Then it is decided. The Fellowship of the Ring will be formed. We shall set forth at first light. As Frodo looked around the table, he felt a surge of hope mingling with his fear. He was surrounded by powerful allies, each with their own reasons for joining the quest. Together, they would face unimaginable dangers, but they would also share the burden of the ring. With the decision made, Elrond's voice rang clear, "Remember, the road ahead is fraught with peril. Trust one another, and above all, protect Frodo. He carries a weight that none of us can fathom." As the council began to disperse, Frodo felt the gravity of their mission settle over him. The shadows of Sauron's influence loomed larger than ever, but with the Fellowship by his side, perhaps there was a glimmer of hope to be found in the darkness. That night, as Frodo lay in a comfortable bed in Rivendell, he could hear the soft sounds of elven music drifting through the halls, a reminder of beauty amidst the impending storm. He closed his eyes, steeling himself for the journey ahead, knowing that the fate of Middle-earth rested in his small hands. The dawn broke over Rivendell, casting a golden light across the verdant landscape. Frodo awoke to the sound of soft melodies wafting through the open window, the air rich with the scent of blooming flowers. For a brief moment, he found comfort in the tranquility of the elven haven, but the weight of the task ahead quickly came rushing back. After a simple breakfast, Frodo made his way to the grand hall where the Fellowship would gather for the first time. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and purpose. Elrond stood at the head of the table, flanked by Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, and the three Hobbit companions, Merry, Pippin, and Samwise. As Frodo entered, all eyes turned to him, and he felt a mix of pride and trepidation. The gravity of the moment pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. He was no longer just a hobbit, he was the ring-bearer, the one tasked with the monumental responsibility of destroying the One Ring. "Welcome, my friends," Elrond began, his voice calm and authoritative. "Today, we unite as the Fellowship of the Ring. Each of you has chosen to stand against the shadow of Sauron and protect the future of Middle-earth. It is time to introduce ourselves and affirm our oaths." Gandalf gestured for Frodo to take his place at the table. As the ring-bearer, Frodo Baggins will carry the burden of the One Ring. He must be protected at all costs. Frodo looked around the table, meeting the eyes of his companions. "I will do my best to fulfill this task, though I am only a simple hobbit," he said, his voice steadying as he spoke. "I may not be strong or brave like you, but I will carry the ring and do whatever is necessary to keep it safe." Next to him, Samwise Gamgee, his loyal friend and gardener, spoke up. "Mr. Frodo, you won't be alone. I'm coming with you. I'll always be at your side, no matter what comes." His determination was palpable, and Frodo felt a swell of gratitude for Sam's unwavering loyalty. Merry and Pippin chimed in, their spirits high. "And we'll help too," Merry declared. "It's not right for you to face all this on your own, Frodo. We're in this together." Elrond nodded approvingly, pleased by the resolve of the hobbits. "Well said. Loyalty and friendship will be your greatest allies in the trials to come." Next, Aragorn spoke, his voice deep and resolute. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I pledge my sword and my life to protect Frodo and this fellowship. I have long sought to fight against the shadow that looms over us, and this is my chance to do so." Legolas stood, his presence ethereal, almost otherworldly. "I am Legolas of the woodland realm. I vow to lend my bow and my skills to this fellowship. The elves of my people have long battled the darkness, and I shall do so once more." Gimli, the stout dwarf, crossed his arms over his chest. "I am Gimli, son of Gloin. Though dwarves and elves have often clashed, I stand here today for the sake of friendship and the defense of Middle-earth. I will guard you, Frodo, and my axe will cleave any foe that threatens our quest." Boromir, the proud man of Gondor, added with fervor, "I am Boromir, son of Denethor. I will defend the ring and its bearer, but I must also voice a warning: we must consider the power the ring holds. If we do not take care, it may lead us to ruin." Gandalf, observing the growing camaraderie, nodded. "We have all pledged our oaths, but we must also be aware of the dangers that lie ahead. The ring corrupts, and it tests the resolve of even the mightiest among us." As the Council of Elrond continued, they each spoke of their oaths, binding themselves to the task at hand. They pledged to protect Frodo and each other, promising to face whatever evil awaited them with courage and unity. Elrond raised his hand for silence, and the assembly quieted once more. "Let us forge a pact. Each of you, stand forth and speak your oath." One by one, the members of the fellowship approached the table, placing their hands upon the map of Middle-earth spread before them. Frodo stepped up first, his heart pounding as he laid his hand on the table. "Frodo Baggins, do swear to carry the One Ring to Mount Doom and to destroy it, though I know not what lies ahead," he said, his voice steady despite the fear swirling within him. Next came Sam, his eyes filled with determination. "I, Samwise Gamgee, swear to protect Mr. Frodo, no matter the cost." Merry and Pippin stepped forward together. "We both swear to stand by Frodo and Sam, and to do our part in this journey," they said in unison, their voices filled with youthful zeal. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir followed suit, each expressing their commitment to the quest and their resolve to protect the ring-bearer. Finally, Gandalf approached, his wise eyes reflecting the weight of centuries. "I, Gandalf the Grey, vow to guide and protect this fellowship as best I can, for the fate of Middle-earth rests upon our shoulders." With their oaths spoken, an unbreakable bond formed among the fellowship. The air hummed with a sense of purpose, a shared understanding that they were about to embark on a journey that would change the course of history. Elrond observed the gathering with satisfaction, knowing that united they stood a chance against the darkness that threatened to engulf their world. "Then let us prepare for our departure. We set forth at first light. May the stars guide our way and the courage in our hearts light the path ahead." As Frodo stood among his companions, he felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. Together, they would face the trials to come, bound by friendship and a shared purpose. With each passing moment, he knew they were ready to confront the shadows of Sauron, and perhaps, just perhaps, reclaim the light for Middle-earth. The sun rose slowly over the hills of Rivendell, casting a warm glow over the landscape and illuminating the shimmering waters of the river that flowed nearby. The gentle sounds of nature surrounded the last homely house, but the atmosphere among the fellowship was thick with anticipation and uncertainty. Today was the day they would begin their perilous journey to Mount Doom. Frodo stood at the edge of the gardens, taking in the beauty of the place that had sheltered him in recent days. He felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving this serene haven behind. The lush greenery, the tranquil music of the elven songs, and the comforting presence of his friends had created a bubble of safety that would soon burst as they stepped into the wider world, filled with danger and darkness. Sam joined him, noticing the somber look on Frodo's face. "What's troubling you, Mr. Frodo?" Sam asked, his voice gentle yet filled with concern. Frodo sighed, trying to gather his thoughts. I feel a mix of things, Sam. Excitement, fear, and a bit of longing for home. I've never traveled far from the Shire before, and now I'm about to embark on a quest that could change everything." Sam nodded, his brows furrowed in understanding. "It's all right to feel that way, Mr. Frodo. You're doing something important, something brave. Just remember, you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll always be here." Frodo smiled, grateful for Sam's unwavering support. "Thank you, Sam. It means a lot to me." As the morning wore on, the fellowship gathered in the courtyard, their packs filled with supplies, weapons at the ready, and the weight of purpose on their shoulders. Elrond stood before them, his presence commanding as he offered final words of guidance and wisdom. "May your hearts be strong, and your spirits remain unyielded in the face of darkness. Remember that hope is a powerful ally, and trust in one another will carry you through the darkest of times," Elrond said, his voice resonating with a deep authority. The fellowship nodded, each member feeling the gravity of the journey ahead. Frodo looked at his companions, Gandalf, wise and steadfast, Aragorn, a protector and leader, Legolas, graceful and agile, Gimli, fierce and loyal, Boromir, both proud and conflicted, and his dear friends Merry and Pippin, whose youthful enthusiasm brought a lightness to the heavy atmosphere. As they prepared to leave, Frodo took a moment to absorb the scene around him. The elves of Rivendell gathered to bid farewell, their faces a mixture of hope and sorrow. Among them was Arwen, the beautiful elven maiden who had captured his attention during his time in Rivendell. She stepped forward, her expression serene yet resolute. "May the stars guide your path, Frodo," she said softly, her voice like music. "You carry the fate of many in your hands. Know that you are loved and cherished. Your courage will shine bright in the darkest times." Frodo felt a rush of warmth at her words, but a deep ache settled in his heart at the thought of leaving her behind. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Arwen. I will do my best to return." With that, the fellowship began to make their way down the winding path that led away from Rivendell, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. As they ventured further, Frodo's mixed emotions swirled within him. The exhilaration of adventure beckoned, yet the weight of the ring, heavy in his pocket, reminded him of the great peril they faced. The group traveled through the trees, the sunlight dappling the forest floor, casting playful shadows as they walked. The laughter of Merry and Pippin filled the air, and Sam's cheerful banter brought a sense of comfort to the tense atmosphere. But even as they shared moments of lightness, Frodo felt the shadow of what lay ahead lurking just beyond their view. As they reached a high ridge, Frodo paused and looked back at Rivendell. The last homely house stood proud and beautiful, a beacon of hope in a world that was growing darker. He took a deep breath, trying to etch the image of this place into his memory. "Frodo, come on," Merry called, beckoning him to join the group. "We've got a long way to go." With a final glance, Frodo turned away from Rivendell, feeling a mix of resolve and trepidation. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was not alone. The bonds of friendship forged in that moment filled him with a flicker of hope. As they descended from the ridge and into the depths of the wilderness, Frodo felt the cool air brushing against his skin, invigorating him for the trials ahead. The fellowship was united, each member prepared to face whatever darkness awaited them. And though fear lingered in his heart, Frodo knew that they would fight together, for the fate of Middle-earth depended on their success. With every step taken, he embraced the uncertainty of the journey, determined to protect his friends and fulfill his destiny as the ring-bearer. Together, they would confront the shadows of Sauron and strive to reclaim the light for their world. The fellowship pressed onward through the untamed wilderness, the crisp air invigorating as they left the serene beauty of Rivendell behind. The path they followed was rough and winding, leading them through dense forests and over rocky hills. Frodo walked alongside Sam, both of them filled with a sense of purpose, while the others flanked them, sharing stories and laughter to ease the growing tension. As they traversed a narrow path bordered by towering trees, Frodo found himself contemplating the gravity of their mission. Each step felt heavy with the burden of the ring, and he glanced nervously at Gandalf, who walked ahead, his staff glimmering faintly in the filtered sunlight. "Do you think we'll really make it all the way to Mount Doom?" Frodo asked Sam, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to, Mr. Frodo." "It's our only chance," Sam replied, determination etched in his features. "And with all of us together, I reckon we stand a good chance against anything." Their conversation was interrupted by Boromir, who strode up beside them, a contemplative look on his face. "The journey to Moria will be perilous. There are many dangers lurking in the mountains," he said, his tone serious. "We must be prepared for whatever lies ahead." "Danger? From what?" Merry chimed in, a hint of excitement in his voice. "I thought we were heading to a big, empty mountain." Boromir shot him a sidelong glance. "Moria is not just any mountain. Once it was a great dwarven kingdom, but now it is a place of darkness and shadow. You will see." Gimli, overhearing Boromir's comment, bristled. "Do not speak ill of Moria. It is a proud place, a stronghold of my people. The tales of its glory are many, and I will not have you mock it." His eyes gleamed with a fierce loyalty, and Frodo sensed the underlying tension between the dwarf and the man of Gondor. Boromir crossed his arms, his expression defiant. "I do not mock what is lost, but we must not forget the dangers that come from it. The tales of the past cannot shield us from the reality of the present." "Enough," Gandalf said, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "We will face whatever Moria holds together. But we must remain vigilant and trust one another." Frodo felt a wave of unease wash over him. The fellowship had been forged in camaraderie, yet already the shadows of doubt and conflict were beginning to creep in. He glanced at Sam, who offered an encouraging smile, reassuring him that they would face these challenges together. As they continued on their path, the scenery changed from the lush greenery of the forest to rugged terrain. The sound of distant rushing water accompanied them, and the air turned cooler, a precursor to the mountains that loomed ahead. Frodo felt the weight of the ring pressing against his chest, a constant reminder of the burden he carried. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they made camp beside a sparkling stream. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows against the trees, and the warmth brought a welcome comfort after a long day of travel. They shared a simple meal of bread and dried meat, punctuated by Sam's ever-present enthusiasm for cooking, even in the wild. "Just wait until I get back to the Shire," Sam said, his eyes shining with the thought of fresh vegetables and warm pies. "I'll whip up the finest feast you've ever seen, Mr. Frodo." Frodo chuckled, imagining the comforts of home and the kitchen filled with the delicious aroma of his favorite dishes. "You'll have to promise to make enough for everyone, Sam." "Of course, I will." Sam grinned, the camaraderie of their journey uplifting their spirits. The others joined in laughter, sharing tales of their homes and their lives before this quest had begun. As the night deepened, tensions eased, and Frodo felt a sense of belonging swell within him. Even Boromir and Gimli managed to set aside their differences for the moment, joining the others in light-hearted banter. Gandalf, with a twinkle in his eye, shared stories of old, speaking of great battles and the heroics of men and elves alike, but as Frodo listened, he couldn't shake the unease growing in his gut. The dangers ahead loomed larger in his mind, and the thought of Moria filled him with dread. What awaited them in those dark halls? Later that night, as the stars twinkled above them, Frodo found himself unable to sleep. He lay beneath the open sky, staring up at the constellations that had guided travelers for centuries. He could hear the soft breathing of his companions nearby, the gentle murmur of the stream, but the sense of impending danger gnawed at him. Suddenly, Gandalf approached him, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. "Frodo," he said softly, kneeling beside him. "What troubles you, young hobbit?" Frodo sighed, his heart heavy. "I fear for what lies ahead, Gandalf. The ring, it feels so heavy, and Moria, it is filled with darkness." Gandalf placed a reassuring hand on Frodo's shoulder. "You are stronger than you know, Frodo. The darkness will try to sway you, but you must remember the light within you and the bonds of friendship that surround you. Together, you will overcome." Frodo looked into Gandalf's wise eyes, seeking solace in his mentor's words. "I just wish to return home, to the Shire, where it is safe and peaceful." "And you may yet find your way back," Gandalf said, his voice soothing. "But first, you must trust in yourself and your companions. You carry more than just the ring, you carry hope for many." With Gandalf's words echoing in his mind, Frodo felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. They would face whatever awaited them in Moria together, and he would not allow the darkness to overshadow their quest. As the fire crackled and the stars shimmered overhead, Frodo resolved to embrace the journey, no matter how treacherous the path. The bonds of friendship were his greatest strength, and he would rely on them as they ventured into the heart of darkness, where the fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance. The first light of dawn broke over the mountains. casting a pale glow upon the rugged peaks that surrounded the fellowship as they approached the entrance to the mines of Moria. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, thick as the mist that clung to the craggy rocks. Frodo felt his heart quicken in his chest as he stepped closer to the dark maw of the mountain, an ominous void that seemed to swallow the light around it. "Here we are," Gandalf said, his voice low and steady, breaking the tense silence. "The doors of Durin, the great entrance to Moria. Speak, friend, and enter." The elven inscription on the door glimmered faintly in the early light. Frodo could feel the weight of the moment pressing down upon him, as if the very stones were alive with ancient memories. The words danced in his mind as Gandalf began to speak them aloud, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Enin Dor, Naur Ego Vanin," Gandalf recited, pausing for a moment. The door remained closed, and Frodo could sense a growing tension among the group. "Perhaps it requires a key," Boromir suggested, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Or perhaps it is merely an invitation," Gandalf replied, a glimmer of determination sparking in his eyes. He stepped forward and placed his hand against the cool stone of the door, concentrating. Frodo held his breath, anticipation building as the air grew heavier. With a sudden rush of movement, the door creaked open, revealing a gaping darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely beyond. The flickering torches on the walls did little to illuminate the path ahead, casting eerie shadows that twisted and writhed like specters. Gandalf stepped forward, holding his staff aloft to light the way. "Stay close, everyone. We must be cautious within these halls. Moria has not been kind to those who wander too deep." The fellowship entered, crossing the threshold into a realm long forgotten by time. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily in the vast expanse, mingling with the distant drip of water and the whispers of the past that seemed to linger in the air. Ancient stone carvings adorned the walls, telling tales of dwarven craftsmanship and glory. But the beauty was marred by the signs of decay. Many of the stone pillars had crumbled, and the air was thick with the stench of mildew and dust. As they ventured further into the depths, the darkness enveloped them, and Frodo felt a shiver run down his spine. The history of Moria was palpable. It was a place where dwarves once thrived, but now it felt like a tomb, haunted by its dark legacy. "Keep your weapons ready," Aragorn warned, his voice a steady anchor amidst the growing unease. "We do not know what lurks in these shadows." Frodo felt the grip of fear tighten around his heart. The ring pulsed against him, a reminder of the evil that sought to reclaim it. He glanced at Sam, who walked closely beside him, his expression resolute. "We'll be all right, Mr. Frodo. Just stick together," Sam said, attempting to bolster Frodo's spirits even as the darkness pressed in around them. The fellowship pressed deeper into Moria, their path illuminated by Gandalf's light. They traversed ancient halls adorned with stone statues of long-gone dwarven kings, each one watching over them like silent guardians. Yet, the deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very stones mourned the fate of their builders. Suddenly, they entered a vast chamber, a grand hall that once echoed with laughter and music, but was now filled with an eerie silence. The fellowship paused to take in the sight before them. In the center of the hall stood a great stone platform, flanked by crumbling pillars, remnants of a once thriving civilization. "Here lies the chamber of Mazarbul," Gandalf said solemnly, his eyes scanning the walls. "This is where Balin, the dwarven lord, attempted to reclaim Moria. Frodo stepped closer, drawn to the remnants of dwarven history. He could see faded inscriptions etched into the stone, chronicling the rise and fall of the dwarves. But as he read the words, a chill gripped him. There were ominous warnings about the awakening of a darkness that dwelled below. A sudden rumble echoed through the chamber, and dust began to fall from the ceiling. Frodo's heart raced as he looked around at his companions, their faces filled with apprehension. Quickly, "We must move," Gandalf urged, his voice rising above the growing tremors. "We cannot linger here." They hurried across the chamber, navigating the debris and remnants of the past. But as they reached the far end, a guttural roar filled the air, reverberating through the stone walls. The fellowship froze, their eyes wide with terror. What was that? Merry gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something ancient and malevolent," Gandalf replied, gripping his staff tightly. "We must be on our guard." As if in response to their fear, a massive figure emerged from the shadows at the far side of the chamber. The creature was towering and fearsome, its skin dark as coal, with fiery eyes that burned with an unholy rage. The Balrog, a creature of flame and shadow, had awakened from its slumber. "Flee!" Gandalf shouted, as the Balrog unleashed a terrifying roar that echoed through the chamber. Flames flickered around its form, illuminating the darkness with a hellish glow. The fellowship turned to run, but the Balrog surged forward, its fiery whip cracking through the air, striking the ground with a force that sent tremors rippling through the stone. Frodo felt the heat radiating from the creature, a fierce and overwhelming presence that threatened to consume them all. "Stay together!" Aragorn yelled, rallying the group as they sprinted back toward the entrance. The shadows closed in around them, and Frodo's heart raced with panic. As they fled, Gandalf took up a defensive position at the rear. "You shall not pass," he shouted, raising his staff to confront the monstrous creature. The air crackled with energy as he summoned the power of light to combat the darkness. The Balrog lunged forward, and a fierce battle erupted between light and shadow. Gandalf stood resolute, his voice echoing with ancient power as he channeled all his strength into a barrier of light, holding the Balrog at bay. Frodo watched in horror, his breath caught in his throat. The clash of power shook the very foundation of Moria. "Gandalf," he cried, fear gripping him as the reality of their situation set in. "Go. Now!" Gandalf shouted, his voice strained but fierce. "Do not look back. You must escape." Without thinking, Frodo grabbed Sam's hand, and they pushed forward, following Aragorn and the others as they dashed toward the exit. The sounds of battle roared behind them, the clash of metal and the cries of the Balrog echoing through the dark halls. As they raced out of the chamber of Mizarble and back into the winding passages of Moria, Frodo felt a pang of desperation. They were leaving Gandalf behind, facing an unimaginable evil alone. The thought threatened to crush his spirit, but there was no time for doubt. The path narrowed ahead, and the fellowship squeezed through the stone archways, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. The darkness of Moria was alive with the echoes of their flight, the shadows chasing them as they raced toward the light of day. Frodo's thoughts whirled as they neared the exit. Would they make it? Would they lose Gandalf to the darkness? And what of the Balrog? The ancient terror that now pursued them, with each step, Frodo felt the weight of the ring growing heavier, as if it sensed the turmoil and despair around them. But as they reached the final threshold, a burst of light greeted them, illuminating the path ahead. With a final push, they burst into the open air, tumbling into the sunlight. Frodo fell to the ground, gasping for breath as he looked back at the dark entrance of Moria, where shadows swirled and roars echoed. "Gandalf," he called, but the mountains remained silent. The fellowship gathered, breathless and shaken, their eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. They had escaped the clutches of Moria, but at what cost? The weight of loss hung heavily in the air, the echoes of their fallen friend lingering in their hearts. As they turned away from the darkness, Frodo steeled himself for what lay ahead. The road to Mount Doom was fraught with peril, and the shadows of Moria would not be easily forgotten. Together, they would carry on, but the memory of their confrontation with the Balrog would haunt them for the rest of their journey. The air outside the mines of Moria was crisp and clear, the sun shining down on the mountains, but the brightness felt like a cruel mockery in the wake of their loss. Frodo sat on a stone, his heart heavy with despair, as the rest of the fellowship gathered around him, their faces pale and stricken with grief. Gandalf was gone, lost to the darkness, and with him, the hope that had guided them through the shadows. The fear of the Balrog and the harrowing escape from Moria had been eclipsed by the realization that they had lost a powerful ally, a mentor, and a friend. Frodo clenched the ring in his hand, feeling its familiar weight against his palm, a constant reminder of the peril they faced. Tears brimmed in his eyes as he remembered Gandalf's fierce determination, his voice commanding the darkness to stay back. "You shall not pass," echoed in his mind, a haunting refrain that now felt like a eulogy. "We should not have left him," Sam cried, his voice thick with emotion. "He would have come with us if he could. We should have stayed and fought." Aragorn knelt beside Frodo, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We could not." Gandalf knew what he was doing. He gave us the chance to escape. We must honor his sacrifice by continuing our quest. But Frodo could not shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at him. It was his burden to bear, the ring that had drawn them into danger. "It's my fault," he whispered, staring at the ground. "If I hadn't taken the ring, he would still be here. He died because of me." "No, Frodo," Legolas interjected gently, kneeling beside him. "The darkness of Moria would have come for us all, with or without the ring. Gandalf gave us the best chance to survive. We must not forget that." But as they sat in the silence of the mountains, Frodo felt an insurmountable rift forming within the fellowship. The bonds that had brought them together were beginning to fray, the weight of their grief and fear pulling them apart. Boromir, pacing nearby, clenched his fists, a storm brewing within him. "We have lost a great warrior, and yet we must carry on. We must find a way to destroy the ring. But we are not safe here." His eyes scanned the horizon, tension crackling in the air. "What do you suggest, Boromir?" Gimli asked, crossing his arms. "We have barely escaped the darkness of Moria. We must regroup and decide our next course of action." "Regroup? We have lost Gandalf, and now we are a ship without a captain." Boromir snapped, his frustration boiling over. "We need to go to Gondor. My city needs me, and it is there that we can mount a proper defense against the coming darkness. Gondor! Sam exclaimed, incredulous. And leave Frodo to carry the ring alone? That would only put him in greater danger. The ring is a burden that we all bear, Boromir argued, his voice rising. It is a weapon, a tool that can save us if we but use it wisely. We must take it to Gondor. It belongs in the hands of those who can wield it for the good of Middle-earth. Don't you see? Frodo's voice broke through the argument, desperation coloring his tone. It corrupts. It draws out the worst in people. I cannot go to Gondor, it would only bring more peril to your people and to myself. I must carry it alone. Alone? Merry interjected, his voice trembling. You can't do this, Frodo. We are your friends, and we will stand by you. We made a promise. Do not speak of promises. Boromir shot back. Your loyalty blinds you. You do not understand the stakes. This ring holds power beyond your comprehension. It cannot be destroyed. It must be used. The air was thick with tension as the fellowship stood divided, voices raised, emotions raw. Each member's heart weighed down by the shadows of their loss, and the desire for survival began to pull them in different directions. Frodo looked around at his companions, their faces filled with determination but also fear and uncertainty. They had all sacrificed so much, and now it felt as if they were teetering on the edge of a precipice. I cannot do this anymore, Frodo whispered, the weight of the ring pressing heavily upon him. I must go alone. You do not understand what it is like to carry this burden. It calls to me, and I fear what it will do to all of you if I stay. No. Sam protested, stepping forward. Mr. Frodo, you can't. You'll be walking into the fire alone. We're all in this together. But Frodo felt a surge of determination mixed with sorrow. I must do this for you, for all of you. I cannot risk bringing the darkness upon you. You have already lost so much. I will go to Mount Doom alone. Frodo, please. Merry and Pippin pleaded, desperation in their voices. But Frodo could see the resolution in his eyes. The path ahead was fraught with danger, and he had to protect his friends, even if it meant sacrificing his own safety. With a heavy heart, Frodo turned away from them, the ring clasped tightly in his palm. I will leave at dawn. You will never have to face the darkness because of me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the fellowship stood in somber silence, the weight of their despair heavy in the air. The bonds that had united them now felt strained, the grief of their loss morphing into fear of what lay ahead. That night, as they made camp beneath the stars, Frodo lay awake, haunted by the choices he had made. He felt the ring pulsing with dark energy, a constant reminder of its seductive power and the destruction it could unleash. He feared for his friends, for their safety and the toll that the quest would take on them. As dawn broke, Frodo rose before the others, silently gathering his few possessions. He stole a glance back at the slumbering forms of his companions, his heart aching at the thought of leaving them behind. But he knew it was for their own good. With a final look at the fellowship, Frodo slipped away into the morning mist, the ring guiding his path. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but he felt a sense of clarity. He was determined to carry the burden alone, even if it meant walking into the darkness without the light of his friends by his side. As he stepped into the unknown, Frodo felt the echoes of his companions' laughter and love fading behind him. The road to Mount Doom lay ahead, and he was prepared to face whatever shadows awaited him in the depths of Mordor. He would not allow the ring to claim anyone else, but as the morning sun broke through the clouds, Frodo could not shake the feeling that the Fellowship was irrevocably changed. The breaking of their bond weighed heavily on his heart, a wound that might never heal. And yet, he pressed forward, determined to fulfill his quest, knowing that in doing so, he may just save Middle-earth from the darkness that sought to consume it. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the landscape, illuminating the path ahead as Frodo walked in silence. The weight of the One Ring hung heavily around his neck, a constant reminder of the burden he carried. The crisp air was filled with the scent of pine and earth, yet Frodo felt an emptiness that overshadowed the beauty around him. He had left the Fellowship behind, the heart-wrenching choice echoing in his mind. Every step forward felt like a step away from the warmth of friendship, a painful severance that left him cold and alone. Yet deep down, he knew that it was the only way to protect them. As he pressed on, a familiar presence broke through his solitude. Sam appeared beside him, his expression a mixture of determination and concern. "Mr. Frodo," he said quietly, glancing up at his friend. "I couldn't just let you go off alone." Frodo stopped, the weight of Sam's loyalty striking him anew. "Sam, you shouldn't have followed me. This is my burden to bear. You have your own life in the Shire. You shouldn't have to face this darkness. But I can't let you do this alone." Sam's voice was resolute. "You're my best friend, and I'll not abandon you. If you're going to Mordor, then I'm going too. No matter what dangers lie ahead." Frodo looked into Sam's earnest eyes, feeling a surge of gratitude mixed with guilt. "I don't want to put you in danger. It's already cost us so much. You've already lost so many friends because of me. If anything were to happen to you, nothing's going to happen to me." Sam interrupted, his voice firm. "I won't let it. You can't get rid of me that easily, Mr. Frodo. We made a promise to see this through together, remember?" Frodo took a deep breath, knowing that Sam's unwavering loyalty was a force he could not easily deny. "But what if I can't keep you safe?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I lead you to doom?" Sam stepped closer, his voice gentle but resolute. "We're in this together. I trust you, Frodo. You're not just carrying the ring, you're carrying hope for all of us. I'll follow you to the ends of Middle-earth if I have to." Frodo hesitated, torn between his desire to protect Sam and the understanding that they were stronger together. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "All right, Sam. We will continue to Mordor together. But we must be cautious. The path ahead is fraught with danger, and I fear what lies ahead." A determined smile spread across Sam's face, brightening the shadows that had lingered in Frodo's heart. "Together then. We'll face whatever comes, just like we always have." As they set off down the winding path toward Mordor, Frodo felt a sense of renewed determination. With Sam by his side, the weight of the ring felt a little lighter, the burdens of their quest slightly more bearable, yet, as they journeyed through the hills and valleys, Frodo couldn't shake the feeling of mistrust that simmered just below the surface. While he trusted Sam implicitly, the shadow of the ring crept into his thoughts, whispering insidious doubts. What if he inadvertently put Sam at risk? What if he was not strong enough to resist the ring's temptations? Days turned into weeks as they traveled through desolate lands, facing harsh weather and relentless terrain. The sun burned bright, yet the chill of dread seeped into Frodo's bones. Every night, as they made camp beneath the stars, he could sense the ring pulling at him, urging him to keep it hidden, to embrace its power. One evening, as they settled beside a small fire, Frodo stared into the flames, his mind a tempest of conflicting emotions. Sam was gathering firewood, humming softly to himself, oblivious to Frodo's turmoil. "Sam," Frodo called softly, breaking the silence. "Do you ever worry about the ring?" Sam paused, looking at Frodo with a mixture of concern and confusion. "Worry? Of course I do. It's a wicked thing, that ring. But we'll destroy it. We have to believe that." Frodo's heart ached at Sam's unwavering hope, yet he couldn't shake the doubts. "It's not just the ring I worry about. It's me. I fear what it could do to me, how it might change me. I could become a monster, Sam. I don't want to hurt you." Sam crouched beside Frodo, his eyes steady and reassuring. "You won't hurt me, Mr. Frodo. You're the same Frodo I've always known. It's the ring that's the real enemy here. You have to remember that." "But what if the ring is stronger than me?" Frodo whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "What if it tries to twist my mind, to make me turn against you? Then we'll face that together." Sam declared firmly, his grip on Frodo's shoulder strong and steady. "You're not alone in this, and I won't let it take you away from me. We'll fight it, and we'll win." Frodo felt a warmth spreading through his chest at Sam's words, the strength of their friendship fortifying him against the darkness that loomed ahead. "Thank you, Sam. I'm grateful for you," he said, his voice softening. "I couldn't do this without you." Sam smiled, a glimmer of hope lighting his eyes. "Neither could I, Mr. Frodo. We're a team, and we'll see this through to the end." With a renewed sense of purpose, Frodo stood up, looking out over the horizon where the land dipped into shadow. Mordor awaited, dark and foreboding, but now he felt a flicker of hope kindling within him. Together with Sam, they would confront the challenges ahead, and he would fight against the darkness not just for himself, but for his friend and for all of Middle-earth. As the stars blinked into view above them, Frodo realized that their journey was not just a path to destruction, it was a testament to their friendship, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. And as long as they stood together, he believed they could overcome even the most insurmountable odds. The journey to Mordor would be perilous, but with Sam by his side, he felt a flicker of determination that would light their way through the encroaching shadows. The journey toward Mordor was as treacherous as the tales had foretold. Frodo and Sam trekked through rugged terrain, climbing steep hills and traversing rocky outcrops that jutted from the earth like the teeth of some ancient beast. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the One Ring pulling at Frodo's spirit. The sun was often shrouded by thick clouds, casting a dim pallor over the landscape, and the wind howled through the canyons, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked just beyond sight. "Keep your spirits up, Mr. Frodo," Sam encouraged, trying to break the oppressive silence. "The hills may be steep, but we're making good time. Just think of a nice hot meal back in the Shire." Frodo managed a weak smile, grateful for Sam's unwavering optimism. "You're right, Sam. It feels like the shadows are closing in around us." As they climbed higher, the terrain became increasingly harsh. The air grew thin and cold, and the path narrowed, winding through a jagged gorge that echoed with the sounds of distant thunder. Frodo felt a shiver run down his spine, a warning that something was not quite right. "Stay close, Sam," Frodo murmured, scanning the rocky walls that surrounded them. "I feel as though we're being watched." "I don't like this place at all," Sam replied, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's too quiet." Just as they rounded a corner, a flicker of movement caught Frodo's eye. He froze, instinctively reaching for the ring, which pulsed against his chest. From behind a cluster of boulders, a figure emerged, thin, wiry, and crouching like a feral animal. "It was Gollum, precious," Gollum hissed, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to echo in the stillness. His large, pale eyes glinted with a mix of fear and greed. "We sees it. We knows it is here." Frodo's heart raced. He had heard tales of Gollum, the wretched creature who had once possessed the ring, twisted by its power and consumed by his own obsession. "What do you want, Gollum?" Frodo asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Gollum took a step forward, his gaze locked onto Frodo's hand, where the ring hung. "We wants it back. It was ours. The precious is lost, but we will find it again." His fingers twitched as if reaching for an unseen treasure, the madness swirling in his eyes. "Stay back," Sam shouted, stepping protectively in front of Frodo. "You won't lay a finger on him or that ring." Frodo felt a rush of fear but also a strange sense of sympathy for the creature before him. "Gollum, you don't understand. This ring is a curse. It will only bring you pain and suffering." "Pain and suffering?" Gollum echoed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "No, no, we were happy once, before the filthy hobbitses took it from us. We wants to be free again, precious." "Freedom?" Sam challenged, his voice firm. "You think that ring will free you? It'll do just the opposite. It'll enslave you." Gollum hissed, his expression shifting from desperation to anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, stupid hobbitses. We can help you. We knows the way to Mordor. We can be useful." Frodo felt a pang of indecision. He glanced at Sam, who looked back with narrowed eyes, distrust evident in his expression. "Sam, maybe we should hear him out," Frodo suggested cautiously. "He knows these lands." "Are you mad?" Sam exclaimed. "This creature is dangerous, Frodo. We can't trust him. He's been twisted by the ring. But we can't navigate these lands alone, Frodo countered, his voice softening. If he knows a safe path, safe. There's no such thing as a safe path in these parts. Sam argued, but he could see Frodo's resolve hardening. You'll just be leading us into more danger, mark my words. Gollum, sensing the growing tension, dropped to his knees, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. Please, precious hobbits. We helps you. We knows the dark places, the way to the Black Gate. We can be your guide, yes. Trust us, trust Gollum. Frodo hesitated, torn between his instincts and the weight of the ring's call. He looked into Gollum's eyes and saw the flicker of something familiar, a longing for freedom and acceptance. Very well, Frodo finally said, his voice steady but uncertain. But if you betray us, we won't hesitate to leave you behind. Gollum's eyes widened with a mix of joy and relief, and he bowed his head, his voice a whisper. Yes, precious. We will not betray you. We will lead you safely to Mordor, yes. As they continued along the perilous path, Frodo felt the tension simmering beneath the surface. The journey was now intertwined with Gollum, whose presence was both a comfort and a threat. Sam walked beside Frodo, casting wary glances at their new companion. I don't like this, Mr. Frodo. I can't shake the feeling that he's playing us for fools. I know, Sam, Frodo replied, his voice low. But we need to move forward. I have to trust my instincts, and right now, Gollum seems to know this terrain better than we do. The trio continued their arduous trek, with Gollum leading the way through dark ravines and across treacherous riverbanks. The landscape grew increasingly grim, and the air grew heavy with the scent of decay. Frodo felt the ring thrumming against his chest, a constant reminder of its dark influence, and with every step, his trust in Gollum wavered. Late in the evening, they made camp near a rocky outcropping, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the ground. Frodo sat by the fire, staring into the flames, wrestling with his thoughts. Sam busied himself preparing a small meal, casting nervous glances at Gollum, who lurked at the edge of the shadows, his gaze fixated on Frodo. Stay away from the fire, Gollum, Sam warned, his voice low and threatening. You're not welcome here. Not welcome. Gollum replied, his voice dripping with mock hurt. But we're all friends now, aren't we? Isn't that what precious hobbitses wanted? To trust? Trust? Sam shot back. You don't understand the meaning of the word, you wretched creature. Frodo felt a wave of unease wash over him as he watched Gollum's expression twist into something darker. He sensed the creature's desperation, the way his mind flickered with twisted intentions. Gollum, just stay close to the fire, Frodo said, attempting to maintain control of the situation. Close to the fire, yes, precious. But fire can be tricky, can't it? Gollum muttered cryptically, his eyes darting between the flames and Frodo. As night fell, Frodo struggled to keep his eyes open, the weight of fatigue pressing down on him. He tried to find solace in sleep, but the shadows danced around him, whispering doubts and fears. Gollum's presence nagged at the back of his mind, a reminder of the darkness that sought to engulf them all. And the stillness of the night, Frodo turned to Sam, who was keeping watch. "Sam," he whispered, "do you think we can trust him?" Sam's gaze was sharp, his brows furrowed. "I don't know, Mr. Frodo. He's dangerous, and I fear what he might do when the darkness creeps in." Frodo nodded, the uncertainty weighing heavily on his heart. "If he does betray us, we must be ready to defend ourselves. I can't let the ring take hold of me. I must resist its power." Together, they kept watch through the long hours of the night, their bond strengthened by the shared burden of their perilous journey. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the shadows of Gollum's betrayal loomed large. But even as doubt crept in, Frodo felt a flicker of determination igniting within him. He would not let the ring control him, nor would he allow Gollum's dark influence to sway his path. They would continue toward Mordor, and together with Sam, he would find a way to confront the darkness that awaited them. With dawn's light breaking over the horizon, Frodo knew that the perilous journey was only just beginning, and he was determined to face whatever lay ahead with courage and resolve, trusting in the strength of their friendship to see them through the shadows. The forest of Fangorn loomed before Merry and Pippin, ancient trees towering high above them, their thick trunks gnarled and twisted as if shaped by the very hands of time. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the atmosphere with a sense of quiet magic. As they wandered deeper into the woods, the two hobbits exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what awaited them within the shadows. "Do you think we'll find any ents here?" Pippin asked, peering into the dim underbrush. "I've heard they're quite magnificent." Merry nodded, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "If they're anything like the stories, they'll be massive. But we should be careful. I don't want to anger a tree." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the trees, causing the ground to tremble beneath their feet. Pippin jumped, eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" "Maybe it's just an earthquake," Merry suggested, though his voice quivered with uncertainty. "Or perhaps one of those giant trees moving." As they pressed further into Fangorn, the sound grew louder, a deep, resonant voice that vibrated through the very core of the forest. "Who walks among us?" the voice boomed, rich and melodic, yet tinged with an ancient weariness. Merry and Pippin froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. Just a couple of hobbits," Merry called out, trying to sound brave despite the quiver in his voice. "We mean no harm." From the shadows emerged a towering figure, a great ent with bark-like skin and eyes that glimmered with wisdom. His limbs moved slowly, as if each step required a great effort. "Hobbits, you say?" the ent rumbled, his voice deep like the roots of the mountains. "What brings you to Fangorn, little ones?" Pippin stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe. "We've been lost, trying to find our friends. We're on an important quest." "Quest?" the ent pondered, tilting his head as if contemplating the very nature of the word. "This forest has seen many quests, but time flows differently here. What urgency drives you through these ancient woods?" Merry took a deep breath, stepping beside Pippin. "There's a great evil stirring in the land. The Dark Lord Sauron is gathering power, and we must warn the free peoples of Middle-earth. Our friends are in danger, and we need help." The Ent regarded them with eyes like ancient pools of wisdom. "Sauron, you say? The shadow that has plagued this world for ages? Yes, we have felt his stirrings. The trees whisper of his darkening influence. But few have ventured to awaken us from our slumber. Can you help us?" Pippin asked earnestly, desperation creeping into his voice. "We need your strength and your wisdom. The war is coming, and we can't face it alone." The Ent's gaze deepened, and he seemed to contemplate the very roots of the forest. Help is a weighty matter. The Ents have long kept to themselves, watching the world change from afar. Yet the time may be upon us when we can no longer remain idle. The trees, too, suffer under the shadow of Sauron's reach. Merry felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "Then you will help us?" "Perhaps," the Ent replied, his voice resonating like the creaking of ancient branches. "But first, we must gather the others. The Ents of Fangorn have slept for too long, and their hearts are heavy with age. It is time for us to awaken." With that, the Ent began to move, calling out to the trees around him. "Awaken, my brothers. The time has come to rise and stand against the darkness." As if in response, the forest stirred. Trees creaked and groaned, and from the shadows, other Ents began to emerge, their forms looming majestically in the dappled sunlight. Each one carried the weight of centuries, their bark-like skin intertwined with the roots of the earth. Merry and Pippin exchanged awestruck glances, their hearts swelling with admiration as the Ents gathered around them. The air crackled with an electric energy as the Ents conversed, their deep voices rumbling like distant thunder. "We must prepare for war," one Ent declared, his voice resonating with authority. "Sauron's reach extends beyond the mountains, and we cannot stand idly by while the forest falls to shadow." "But we cannot go to war without purpose," another Ent added, his tone thoughtful. "What will we fight for if not to protect the lives that thrive within our woods?" Merry felt a sense of urgency build within him. "You must fight for the future. There are countless lives at stake. Sauron threatens all free peoples of Middle-earth, not just the forests. The fate of our world depends on your strength." The Ents fell silent, their eyes turning to Merry and Pippin, considering the weight of his words. After a moment of hushed deliberation, the first Ent spoke again. "Very well, little ones. We will heed your call. We will awaken and gather our strength. But know this, it is a long path, and the time for action is not to be taken lightly." Merry nodded, his heart racing with determination. "Thank you. Together, we can make a difference. We can turn the tide against Sauron." As the Ents began to chant, a deep resonance filled the air, echoing through the trees and stirring the very essence of the forest. The sound was a powerful, ancient melody, awakening life and magic within the woodlands. The leaves rustled in response, as if the entire forest was coming alive with purpose. Merry and Pippin felt a surge of hope wash over them, a feeling that they were part of something much larger than themselves. They were not merely lost hobbits anymore, they were part of a rallying call to unite against the encroaching darkness. As the Ents prepared to march, the urgency of the looming war settled heavily in the hearts of Merry and Pippin. The world was changing, and the echoes of the past blended with the cries of the present. They knew they had to return to their friends, to ensure that the fight against Sauron would not be fought alone. With the Ents leading the way, the hobbits felt a newfound strength within them. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but they were determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their resolve to protect the future of Middle-earth. And so, as the Ents awakened and the call to war resonated through the ancient forest, Merry and Pippin stepped forward with renewed courage, ready to play their part in the fight against darkness. The Ents would rise, and with them, the hope of a united front against the looming storm of Sauron. The night sky over Helm's Deep was a swirling mass of dark clouds, casting an ominous shadow over the ancient fortress. The distant sound of war drums echoed through the valleys, a rhythmic pounding that sent tremors of unease through the hearts of those gathered for battle. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stood at the edge of the fortress, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the approaching enemy. "Do you see them?" Aragorn asked, his voice low and steady, though tension rippled beneath the surface. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, a sense of foreboding gnawing at him. Legolas narrowed his eyes, the elf's keen senses honing in on the distant movement of shadows against the backdrop of the mountains. "They come, Aragorn. The Uruk-hai of Saruman march upon us, and their numbers are great." Gimli's hand tightened around his axe as he spoke, determination etched on his face. "Let them come. I've been waiting for a good fight. We'll show them what dwarves are made of." As the three companions took their positions, the horn of Helm's Deep sounded, its echo reverberating through the night, rallying the defenders within the stone walls. Aragorn felt a surge of camaraderie among his fellow men, knowing they were not alone in this fight. They had gathered to defend their home, to protect their people, and to stand against the dark forces of Saruman. In the keep, the men of Rohan prepared themselves, their faces grim but resolute. King Theoden, standing tall at the forefront, addressed his warriors with fervor. "Tonight, we stand against the darkness that threatens to engulf our land. We will fight for our families, for our friends, and for our future. Together, we shall not falter." Cheers erupted from the crowd, the energy of hope igniting a fierce determination within the hearts of those gathered. As the sound of approaching footsteps drew nearer, Aragorn turned to Legolas and Gimli, a sense of purpose lighting his gaze. "We fight together, as one." Legolas nodded, drawing his bowstring taut, a glimmer of anticipation in his eyes. "With precision and speed, we shall fell as many as we can before they breach the walls." Gimli grinned, his axe gleaming in the dim light. "And I'll take down any foul creature that dares to come near. A dwarf never backs down." The time for action was upon them. As the first wave of Uruk-hai surged forward, a chorus of battle cries filled the air, mingling with the clash of steel and the thundering of hooves. The defenders of Helm's Deep took their positions, archers lining the walls while warriors readied themselves for close combat. Aragorn led the charge, rallying the men as they surged forward to meet the enemy. "For Rohan," he shouted, his voice ringing with fierce determination. The two forces collided with a bone-jarring impact, the sounds of clashing swords and agonized cries echoing across the battlefield. Legolas moved with unparalleled grace, his arrows finding their marks with deadly accuracy as he felled Uruk-hai left and right. He danced through the chaos, a blur of movement that captivated the eye, every shot taken with purpose and precision. Beside him, Gimli fought with unmatched ferocity, his axe carving a path through the enemy ranks. "Come on, you foul beasts," he roared, his voice booming over the din of battle. "You'll have to do better than that to take us down." Aragorn's sword sang as it sliced through the air, each swing carrying the weight of his purpose. He fought with the spirit of his ancestors, every strike a tribute to the honor of his lineage. The sight of his comrades battling alongside him fueled his resolve, forging unbreakable bonds of friendship amid the chaos. "Legolas! Gimli!" he called, moving to flank a group of Uruk-hai that threatened to breach their defenses. "We must hold the line. If we fall back now, we will be overrun." Together, they formed an impenetrable triangle, their strengths complementing one another as they fought fiercely against the tide of darkness. As more Uruk-hai pressed forward, Aragorn's heart raced, fueled by the knowledge that lives depended on their bravery. "Look! The enemy is trying to flank us," Legolas shouted, pointing to a group of Uruk-hai attempting to scale the walls. "We must cut them off. Then let us not waste any time." Gimli grinned, charging ahead as he swung his axe with ferocity. To victory! With renewed vigor, they pushed forward, engaging the enemy with a fierce determination that lit a fire in the hearts of their fellow warriors. The defenders of Helm's Deep fought valiantly, their spirits ignited by the sense of purpose that came from unity. The battle raged on, and the night wore heavy with the scent of sweat and blood, the cries of the fallen mingling with the resolve of the living. But just as hope began to wane, a ray of light pierced through the darkness as Gandalf appeared atop a hill, silhouetted against the rising dawn. "Gandalf!" Aragorn cried out, his heart leaping at the sight of his old friend. "You have come!" Gandalf raised his staff, the light around him glowing brighter, illuminating the battlefield. "Ride now! Ride to the aid of your brethren," he commanded, his voice booming with authority. With renewed hope, Theoden rallied his riders, calling forth the riders of Rohan to charge alongside Gandalf. "For Rohan! For the honor of our people!" he shouted, leading the charge down the hill with a fierce CRY.AS. The cavalry surged forward, a wave of hope washed over the battlefield, pushing back against the dark tide. The Uruk-hai, caught off guard, faltered before the onslaught of horses and riders. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fought fiercely, their hearts filled with renewed strength as they pushed forward with their comrades. Side by side, they faced the enemy, their friendship forged in the fires of battle, their resolve unyielding. The tide of battle began to turn as the defenders of Helm's Deep fought with newfound vigor. The bonds of friendship, formed through hardship and struggle, held them together as they faced the darkness that sought to consume them. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, illuminating the battlefield in golden light, the shadows of despair lifted, if only for a moment. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, they knew they would fight as one, united against the encroaching darkness. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, for they were more than just warriors, they were friends, allies forged in the crucible of battle, ready to stand against the shadow of Saruman and defend their world from the forces of evil. The air was thick with a palpable tension as Frodo and Sam navigated the treacherous paths of Mordor. The oppressive landscape stretched before them, a barren wasteland of ash and shadow, where the remnants of a once vibrant land lay in ruins. The One Ring hung heavy around Frodo's neck, its presence a constant whisper in the back of his mind, gnawing at his thoughts and testing his resolve. Frodo's hand instinctively brushed against the ring, feeling its cold surface beneath the fabric of his cloak. It pulsed with a sinister energy, a dark allure that tugged at his very essence. Just a little longer, he murmured to himself, struggling to push the thoughts aside. Just until we reach Mount Doom. Sam walked beside him, ever watchful, but even he could sense the change in Frodo. "You all right, Mr. Frodo?" Sam asked, concern etched on his face. "You seem a bit off." "I'm fine, Sam," Frodo replied, though the lie felt bitter on his tongue. Inside, he felt a war waging, a battle not just against the harshness of their surroundings, but against the seductive call of the ring. It was a temptation that gnawed at his heart, whispering promises of power and safety, beckoning him to embrace its darkness. Yet, as Frodo struggled with the ring's influence, another presence lingered in the shadows, watching and waiting. Gollum, his thin frame barely discernible in the dim light, followed closely behind them, his eyes glinting with a mixture of hunger and obsession. The duality of his nature was evident in every movement. One moment, he appeared pitiful and lost, while the next, a spark of malevolence flickered in his gaze. "Precious," Gollum hissed softly, almost to himself, as he crept closer. "It will be ours again. The Master is weak, yes. Weak and lost." Frodo turned, catching a glimpse of Gollum's haunted face. "Stay back, Gollum," he warned, his voice low. "I can't let you near it." "Why not, Precious?" Gollum replied, a twisted smile creeping across his lips. "We can help you. We can find a way to use the ring. Together, we can be strong." Frodo shook his head, a surge of fear coursing through him. "No. You don't understand. It's corrupting me. I can feel it changing me." Gollum's expression darkened, a flicker of anger crossing his features. "Changing you? No, Precious. It can make you powerful. You just have to let it. Let it in." His voice turned pleading, desperate. "We can be free. We can take it from you, and it will be ours again." Frodo felt a shiver run down his spine at the thought. Gollum was not just a creature of pity, he was a remnant of the ring's hold, twisted and broken by its malevolence. The dark promise of the ring resonated within Frodo, battling against the instinct to push Gollum away. "You don't want to take it," he said, his voice shaking. "It will destroy you." "Destroy?" Gollum sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what it is to have the power, Precious. To rule, to command." He stepped closer, his voice a seductive whisper. "The world can be ours once more." Frodo's grip on the ring tightened, the weight of it a constant reminder of the burden he bore. "You think that power will save you? It will consume you. It has consumed me." The shadows deepened around them as the struggle within Frodo grew more intense. The ring's whispers became louder, drowning out his thoughts, wrapping around him like a vice. He could hear it calling his name, urging him to embrace its dark promise. Take me. You need me. Only with me will you be whole. Sam, sensing the turmoil in Frodo, stepped forward. Mr. Frodo, fight it. Don't let it take you. You're stronger than it. His voice was filled with urgency, a lifeline amid the encroaching darkness, but Gollum, sensing the rift in Frodo's spirit, shifted tactics, his voice softening. Yes, precious, fight it. But why not join us? I can help you. We can take it together. His eyes flickered with a glimmer of hope and madness, embodying the very essence of what the ring represented, a promise of power, but at a devastating cost. Frodo's heart raced, battling against the duality of his surroundings, the light of Sam's unwavering friendship and Gollum's dark temptation. No, he whispered, struggling to find his voice above the tumult within. I can't. I must destroy it. The landscape around them felt like it was closing in, a palpable force of darkness creeping closer. Gollum's face twisted with fury and desperation, his frustration boiling over. You will regret this, precious. You'll see. We will find a way. As Gollum's voice faded into the shadows, Frodo fell to his knees, the weight of the ring pulling him down, a burden he could barely bear. Sam knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're not alone, Mr. Frodo. We'll get through this together. Just hold on. With Sam's words echoing in his heart, Frodo closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth of their friendship, the love that had carried them this far. The whisper of the ring grew fainter, its hold loosening, and he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. I can't let it win, Frodo declared, his voice gaining strength. I will carry it to Mount Doom. I will destroy it. No matter the cost. But deep within him, the ring's influence lurked, a constant reminder of the battle he fought, not just against the darkness of Mordor, but against the darkness within himself. And as Gollum watched from the shadows, his duality evident in the conflict between his shattered past and twisted desires, Frodo realized that the true test of his strength lay ahead. Together, Frodo and Sam rose, determined to continue their perilous journey. The whispers of the ring would haunt them, but they would face the challenges ahead, together, as friends, united against the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume them all. The journey into Mordor was unlike anything Frodo had ever experienced. As he and Sam pressed forward, the landscape shifted dramatically, transforming from the harsh yet familiar terrain of the mountains to a land steeped in darkness and despair. The air grew thick with ash, and the sky overhead was perpetually shrouded in ominous clouds, casting an oppressive pall over everything below. Frodo squinted against the dim light, his heart pounding as they stepped into the desolate realm. Jagged peaks loomed in the distance, their blackened forms jutting like teeth against the horizon. The ground beneath their feet was cracked and barren, a stark reminder of the destruction that had befallen this once vibrant land. What a place this is, Sam, Frodo murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe it's come to this. He glanced around, taking in the twisted trees and the skeletal remains of once thriving plants, now reduced to nothing more than charred stumps. The echoes of their footsteps seemed to linger in the air, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Sam walked closely beside him, his brow furrowed with concern. Mr. Frodo. It's enough to chill the bones." He took a deep breath, trying to steel himself against the dread that seeped into his very soul. "But we've come this far. We can't turn back now." Frodo nodded, but the weight of doubt began to press down on him. Each step deeper into Mordor felt like a step further from hope. He glanced at the ring, still hanging heavily around his neck, a dark reminder of the task that lay ahead. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, whispering promises of safety and power, making it harder to resist its allure. As they continued onward, the terrain became more treacherous. Sharp stones jutted from the ground, threatening to trip them as they navigated the rocky landscape. Frodo's feet felt heavy, each step a struggle against the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm him. The weight of the ring seemed to grow heavier, a constant reminder of the burden he bore. "Do you hear that?" Frodo suddenly asked, halting in his tracks. The sound of distant rumblings echoed through the air, a low, foreboding growl that reverberated through the ground. Frodo's heart raced as he turned to Sam, fear etched on his face. "What if it's the Nazgul? What if they find us?" Sam's expression turned grave, his gaze scanning the desolate horizon. "We'll keep moving, Mr. Frodo. We can't let fear take hold. If they're out there, we'll just have to be quicker than them." Frodo swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. "I wish we had the others with us. I wish Gandalf were here." The thought of their lost companions stirred a wave of sorrow within him, a reminder of the fellowship that had once felt so strong. The absence of their friends weighed heavily on his heart, deepening the isolation that surrounded them. As they pressed on, the desolation of Mordor deepened, and Frodo felt a growing sense of dread settle over him like a shroud. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of his vision, flickering just beyond reach, and the darkness felt alive, threatening, predatory. Every creak of the earth beneath his feet sent a jolt of fear through him. "Sam," Frodo hesitated, his voice trembling. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough to destroy the ring?" The vulnerability of his words hung in the air, the truth of his doubts pouring out like a dark river. Sam turned to him, his eyes fierce with determination. "You are strong, Mr. Frodo. Stronger than you know. Just look at how far you've come. You've faced more than most ever will, and you haven't given up yet. You have to believe in yourself." But Frodo's fear ran deep, and the ring's whisper intensified, weaving through his thoughts like a dark thread. "You are weak. You cannot resist. Give in. It is your destiny." He clenched his fists, trying to silence the voice, but it echoed relentlessly in his mind, feeding the doubt that threatened to consume him. Suddenly, a harsh wind whipped through the desolate landscape, howling like a wailing spirit. Frodo stumbled, shielding his face from the biting gusts. As the wind calmed, he caught sight of something moving in the distance, dark shapes flitting between the shadows, a haunting reminder of the evil that lurked within Mordor. "Look." Frodo pointed, his heart racing. "Do you see that?" Sam squinted into the distance, his brow furrowing. I see it. We should keep moving, Mr. Frodo. Let's not stick around to find out what it is." With a nod, Frodo turned away, forcing himself to focus on the path ahead. Yet, the image of the dark shapes lingered in his mind, a reminder of the ever-encroaching danger that surrounded them. He felt the weight of despair settling over him, tightening its grip with every passing moment. As they continued onward, Frodo's thoughts turned inward, spiraling into a vortex of fear and uncertainty. Would he be able to resist the ring? Would he be able to fulfill the burden thrust upon him? He felt lost in the shadowy depths of Mordor, a mere flicker of light against an overwhelming darkness. "Keep going, Frodo," he whispered to himself, trying to drown out the doubts. "You must. You have to." But deep down, the whisper of the ring lingered, taunting him with visions of what might lie ahead. The path before him twisted and turned, and as they ventured deeper into the heart of Mordor, Frodo couldn't shake the feeling that he was inching closer to something far more terrifying than he could ever imagine. With Sam by his side, he pushed onward, determined to face whatever challenges awaited them. But the shadows loomed ever closer, a constant reminder of the darkness he carried, and the growing fear that perhaps the journey ahead would consume them both. The imposing silhouette of Minas Tirith rose against the stormy skies, its towering walls gleaming with an ethereal light. Yet, despite its beauty, the city was shrouded in tension and despair. The once proud city of Gondor now faced a dire threat, its fate hanging precariously in the balance as the armies of Sauron advanced like a dark tide. Inside the city, Boromir's legacy lingered, casting a long shadow over his brother, Faramir. Faramir stood atop the walls, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the approaching enemy. The weight of expectation settled heavily on his shoulders. He was not only a commander but also a brother striving to honor Boromir's sacrifice. "Faramir," a voice called from behind him. It was Eowyn, her expression fierce yet filled with concern. "You cannot face this threat alone. The people need hope, not despair." Faramir turned to her, the flickering torches casting shadows across his face. "I must defend our city. I will not let it fall." His voice was resolute, but Eowyn could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She stepped closer, determination radiating from her. "Then let us stand together. The people of Gondor need to see their leaders united, not divided by fear." Her hand found his, a silent promise of support that ignited a spark of hope within him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness enveloped the land. The distant sound of war horns echoed through the air, signaling the impending clash. Faramir felt a surge of dread but knew that he had to hold strong, for Boromir, for Gondor, and for the people who depended on him. The siege began with a cacophony of battle cries and the thunderous march of the enemy. The armies of Mordor, a dark sea of orcs and foul creatures, advanced upon Minas Tirith with a ruthless determination. Faramir rallied his men, their resolve steeled by the knowledge of what was at stake. "Brothers," he called, his voice ringing out over the din, "today, we fight not just for our city, but for the legacy of those we have lost. We will stand against this tide, for Gondor and for Boromir." The men cheered, their spirits ignited by Faramir's words, but beneath the surface, uncertainty brewed. As the first arrows rained down upon them, a deep fear settled in the hearts of the defenders. Faramir felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, the fear of failing not just his brother but the entire realm. The siege wore on, the walls of Minas Tirith shaking under the relentless assault. Each time the enemy surged forward, Faramir and his men pushed back with every ounce of strength they could muster. Eowyn fought valiantly alongside them, her sword a flash of silver amidst the darkness, rallying the weary defenders with her fierce spirit. Yet, amidst the chaos of battle, doubts began to creep into Faramir's mind. He thought of Boromir, the brother he had admired and loved, the man who had faced impossible odds with unwavering courage. Would he be able to live up to that legacy? Would he become the leader Gondor needed in this hour of darkness? As night fell, the situation grew increasingly dire. The enemy pressed harder, waves of orcs crashing against the walls like a storm. Faramir's men began to falter, fatigue gnawing at their resolve. Eowyn caught his gaze, her fierce determination shining bright. "We can hold them, Faramir. We must." In that moment, Faramir remembered Boromir's last words to him, words that had resonated in his heart since that fateful day. "You must be brave, little brother. Do not let doubt steal your resolve." He felt a surge of strength, a reminder that he was not alone in this fight, brothers. Faramir shouted, rallying his men once more. "We fight for each other. We fight for our families. And we fight for Boromir, who gave everything for us." The men responded with renewed vigor, their spirits lifted by his words, but just as the tide of battle began to turn, a great horn sounded in the distance, the Horn of Helm, a signal that the forces of Rohan were coming to their aid. Faramir's heart leaped with hope, but he knew the battle was far from over. As the gates of Minas Tirith creaked under the pressure of the enemy, he turned to Eowyn, his voice steady. "We must hold them. If we can just keep them at bay a little longer, we can turn the tide together." The battle raged on, an endless dance of life and death, each moment a test of their bonds of brotherhood. Faramir fought alongside his men, the memory of Boromir propelling him forward, his heart beating with the rhythm of hope. Suddenly, a massive battering ram crashed against the gates, sending splinters flying. Faramir braced himself, knowing that if the gates fell, all would be lost. "Stand strong," he bellowed, channeling all his strength into one last push. The defenders rallied around him, forming a solid line of resolve against the oncoming storm. The gates groaned and rattled as the battering ram struck again, but this time, Faramir felt an overwhelming surge of strength from the memories of his brother, the love they had shared, and the unbreakable bonds that held them together. "Fight for Boromir," he roared, and his voice echoed through the city like a clarion call. "Fight for Gondor." In that moment, the tide began to shift. The defenders, fueled by their shared purpose and the legacy of Boromir, pushed back against the invading force. Eowyn fought valiantly at Faramir's side, the fierce bond of their brotherhood strengthening as they faced the darkness together. And so the battle continued, a fierce storm of valor and despair, with the fate of Gondor hanging in the balance. In the heart of the siege, amid the chaos and the cries of war, the legacy of Boromir shone brightly, a beacon of hope that illuminated their path through the shadows, reminding them that even in the darkest of times, the bonds of brotherhood could light the way forward. The air was thick with anticipation in Minas Tirith. The siege had been broken, but the battle was far from over. As word of Sauron's vast armies spread, the sense of impending doom weighed heavily on the hearts of all who remained within the city's walls. The once mighty city was still reeling from the recent attack, its defenses weakened and its people fearful of what was to come. Faramir stood at the highest point of the city, gazing out across the plains of Gondor. The land stretched endlessly before him, bathed in the dim light of a setting sun, but his mind was focused on the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. These were no ordinary storm clouds, this was a storm of war, and it threatened to engulf all of Middle-earth. He turned to Gandalf, who stood beside him, his ancient face grave and thoughtful. "We don't have much time, do we?" Faramir asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. Gandalf's eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the distance. "No," he replied, his voice filled with a heavy wisdom. "The Dark Lord is mustering his forces. His shadow grows, and soon it will stretch over all lands. We must prepare for what is to come." Faramir nodded, his thoughts racing. He had already sent riders to rally the remaining forces of Gondor, but it would not be enough. They needed more than just swords and shields, they needed allies, many allies, if they were to stand a chance against Sauron's legions. Across Middle-earth, the call to arms was being sounded. Messages were sent to the elves of Lothlorien, the dwarves of Erebor, and the horse lords of Rohan. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli had also taken on the task of gathering as many forces as they could muster. They rode hard and fast, traveling through the wilds to seek out any who would join their cause. Aragorn's heart was heavy as they rode through the forests, his mind focused on the weight of his lineage. He had accepted his role as the heir of Isildur, but with it came great responsibility. Now, he needed to unite the realms of men, elves, and dwarves against a common enemy. There was no time for hesitation or doubt. If they were to stand any chance, all of Middle-earth would need to stand together. "This is a heavy burden, my friend," Gimli remarked, sensing Aragorn's tension as they journeyed. The dwarf's face was grim, yet resolute. "But we have fought impossible battles before, and we've come through them alive." Aragorn nodded, though his thoughts remained somber. "We have, but this battle will test us in ways we have not yet imagined. Sauron's reach grows stronger with every passing day. We must be ready for the full force of his power." Legolas, riding at Aragorn's side, cast a glance toward the horizon. "The elves will answer the call," he said softly, his voice filled with conviction. "My kin will not abandon Middle-earth in its hour of need. We have seen the shadow growing in the east, and we are prepared to fight." Meanwhile, in Rohan, King Theoden was preparing his riders for what he knew would be the final, desperate defense of their lands. The people of Rohan had already been tested at Helm's Deep, but Theoden understood that the battles to come would eclipse anything they had faced before. The stakes were higher, and the fate of the world rested on their courage. "Rohan will ride," Theoden declared to his captains, his voice filled with the strength of a king reborn. "We will not cower in the face of darkness. We will ride to Gondor's aid and beyond, to the very gates of Mordor if we must." In Rivendell, Elrond received word of the coming war. His ancient wisdom guided his decision, and despite the fading power of the elves, he knew they had one last battle to fight. His heart ached for the world of men, but he also understood that if Sauron were not stopped, all races, elves, men, and dwarves alike, would fall under his dominion. "We must lend our strength," Elrond said, his gaze far-seeing as he spoke to his council. "Though the time of the elves wanes, our duty to Middle-earth remains. We will send our warriors to aid in this final stand." Across the misty mountains, in Erebor, the dwarves sharpened their axes and prepared for the war to come. Their king, Dane Ironfoot, stood tall amidst his kin, his eyes blazing with determination. "The dwarves have long fought against the darkness," he declared. "And we will not let Sauron's shadow cover our halls. We march to war alongside the free peoples of Middle-earth." As these forces began to gather, Minas Tirith became a hub of activity. Soldiers and leaders from across the land poured into the city, bringing with them the hope of resistance. The walls of Minas Tirith, once battered and scarred by siege, now stood as a symbol of defiance. In the midst of these preparations, Aragorn returned to Minas Tirith, his arrival marked by the reverence of the people. His presence brought hope to the weary, for they knew that Isildur's heir had returned to lead them. Aragorn immediately convened with Gandalf and Faramir, planning the defense of the city and the greater battle to come. "The forces of darkness gather as we speak," Gandalf warned, his voice a low murmur. "Sauron will not delay. His armies are vast, but we must strike first, unite the free peoples and confront him before his full strength overwhelms us." Aragorn nodded. "The armies of Rohan and the elves will be here soon. We must prepare for their arrival, and then march. This will be the greatest battle Middle-earth has ever seen." Faramir, standing by Aragorn's side, was filled with pride and determination. The memory of his brother Boromir spurred him on, and he was determined to defend Gondor with every ounce of his strength. As night fell over Minas Tirith, the city's defenders stood ready. The sound of smiths hammering weapons, the murmur of strategists making plans, and the resolute footsteps of soldiers echoed through the streets. The storm of war was coming, but the free peoples of Middle-earth had gathered, prepared to stand against the darkness one last time. The coming storm would be fierce and unforgiving, but in the hearts of those who gathered, there remained a flicker of hope, a hope that, despite the odds, they could stand against the shadow and protect their world from the grasp of Sauron. The shadow of Mount Doom loomed ever closer as Frodo and Sam trudged onward, their feet heavy and their spirits worn from the long, grueling journey. The land around them was a wasteland of ash and jagged rocks, with an oppressive heat that seemed to suck the very air from their lungs. The fiery glow of the mountain's peak burned in the distance, casting an ominous red hue across the desolate landscape. Every step brought them closer to the heart of darkness, and with each mile, the burden of the ring grew heavier on Frodo's shoulders. Frodo stumbled, his body trembling from exhaustion and the overwhelming weight of the One Ring. Sam hurried to his side, catching him before he could fall completely. "Steady, Mr. Frodo," Sam said, his voice a mix of concern and quiet strength. "We're almost there. Just a bit further." Frodo looked up at the distant peak, his eyes glazed with fatigue. The ring's influence had grown nearly unbearable. It whispered to him constantly, filling his mind with dark thoughts, promising him power, and tempting him with release from the torment he endured. But beneath the weight of the ring's evil, Frodo's resolve still flickered, faint but steadfast. "I don't know if I can make it, Sam," Frodo murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His hand grasped the chain around his neck, feeling the cold, oppressive presence of the ring resting against his chest. "The weight, it's too much." Sam knelt beside him, his face etched with determination. "You can, Mr. Frodo. I know you can. You've come all this way, through so much hardship. I won't let you give up now. We'll make it, together." Sam's words were filled with unshakable loyalty, his love for Frodo shining through even in the darkest of moments. Frodo closed his eyes, letting Sam's words wash over him like a balm for his weary soul. Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the doubt, he knew that Sam was right. He couldn't give up. Not when they were so close to the end. Not when the fate of all Middle-earth rested on the destruction of the ring. With a deep breath, Frodo forced himself to stand again, though his legs shook beneath him. "You're right, Sam," he said, his voice stronger now. "We have to finish this. We must destroy the ring." They continued their ascent, each step more difficult than the last. The landscape around them grew more twisted and sinister as they approached the heart of Sauron's domain. The sky was choked with ash and smoke, and the ground beneath their feet trembled with the deep rumblings of the mountain. The very air seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, a constant reminder of the evil they were up against. As they neared the base of Mount Doom, Frodo felt the ring's pull intensify. It was as if the dark power of the mountain called to it, urging him to surrender, to claim the power for himself. His hand unconsciously drifted toward the ring, his fingers itching to grasp it, to put it on. The temptation was overwhelming. "No!" Frodo cried out, pulling his hand away, his voice filled with desperation. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head as the ring's whispers grew louder, more insistent. "I won't do it. I won't let it take me." Sam knelt beside him, his face etched with concern. "Mr. Frodo, you have to fight it. You're stronger than the ring. You've resisted it this long. You can do it." Frodo's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought against the dark presence that threatened to consume him. In that moment of clarity, he realized that the ring's power would never let him go. It had twisted and corrupted him, as it had so many others before. But still, he had to try. He had to finish what they had started. With great effort, Frodo forced himself back to his feet, his gaze fixed on the path that lay ahead. Mount Doom stood before them, the entrance to the fiery chasm just visible in the distance. "This was the end. We're almost there," Frodo whispered, more to himself than to Sam. His legs felt like lead, and every step was a monumental effort. But he pushed forward, fueled by the knowledge that this was the only way to destroy the ring and save Middle-earth. As they climbed the final stretch toward the summit, the ground beneath them trembled, and the heat became nearly unbearable. Lava bubbled and roared deep within the mountain, and the air was thick with the stench of sulfur. It was a hellish landscape, a fitting place for the destruction of such an evil artifact. Frodo's vision blurred as they reached the entrance to the cracks of doom, the place where the ring had been forged and the only place where it could be destroyed. He could feel the ring pulsing against his chest, its malevolent power desperate to survive, desperate to return to its master. "This is it," Sam said quietly, his voice filled with both awe and fear. "We've made it, Mr. Frodo." Frodo stared into the fiery abyss below, the molten lava swirling like a living thing. His hand reached for the ring, his fingers trembling as they grasped the chain around his neck. All he had to do was let it go, but as his hand closed around the ring, a sudden surge of power coursed through him, stronger than anything he had felt before. The whispers grew louder, seductive and irresistible. The weight of the ring vanished, replaced by a fierce longing to possess it, to claim its power for himself. Frodo stammered, his heart racing as the ring's pull became too strong to resist. He looked at Sam, his eyes filled with torment. "I can't." Sam's face fell, his heart breaking as he saw the struggle within his friend. "Mr. Frodo, please," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "You have to destroy it. You can't let it take you." Frodo's hand tightened around the ring, his mind consumed by its power. He turned away from the edge of the chasm, his voice filled with finality. "The ring is mine." As Frodo slipped the ring onto his finger, he vanished from sight, leaving Sam standing alone at the edge of the cracks of doom. The weight of despair crushed down on Sam, but in his heart, he knew the battle wasn't over yet. The road to Mount Doom had brought them to this moment, and though Frodo had fallen to the ring's power, hope still lingered. The land of Mordor trembled under the weight of war. Sauron's vast armies had poured out from the Black Gate, surging across the plains of Middle-earth like a tide of darkness. The sky was choked with ash and smoke, casting an eerie red glow over the battlefield. On all sides, the clash of swords, the cries of the wounded, and the thunder of war echoed through the air. The head of the combined forces of men, elves, and dwarves, Aragorn stood tall, wielding Enduril, the Sword of Kings. He led the charge alongside Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, and the riders of Rohan, their banners flying high as they fought desperately to hold back Sauron's forces. The battle was fierce, with the free peoples of Middle-earth struggling against the relentless assault of orcs, trolls, and the terrifying Nazgul, who circled above on their black-winged beasts. The battlefield was a sea of chaos, but the hearts of those fighting remained unyielding. Aragorn swung his blade with ferocity, cutting through wave after wave of enemies, his gaze always shifting toward the Black Gate. He knew that this battle was more than just a fight for survival. It was a distraction, a last, desperate attempt to buy Frodo enough time to complete his task. "Hold the line!" Aragorn shouted over the din of battle. "We must give Frodo every chance to destroy the ring." Gandalf, casting bolts of light and fire, stood alongside him, his eyes sharp with both wisdom and concern. "We are buying him time, but Sauron knows we are at his gates," Gandalf warned. "He will not delay much longer. His eye is searching for Frodo even now." The sense of urgency was palpable. They were outnumbered, but the courage of the free peoples was unbroken. The will to resist Sauron's darkness was their greatest weapon, and they fought on with a tenacity that belied their dwindling numbers. Yet, even as they fought valiantly, a dark presence loomed on the horizon, the Eye of Sauron, blazing atop Barad-dûr, searching, seeking the ring with growing intensity. Meanwhile, far from the battle, on the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo's journey was reaching its climax. He had claimed the ring as his own, disappearing into the shadows after succumbing to its power. Sam, though devastated by Frodo's fall, had not given up hope. He scoured the summit, calling out for Frodo, his voice filled with desperation and love. "Mr. Frodo!" Sam cried, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Please, don't let it take you. Come back." But there was no response. The ring had Frodo in its grasp, and the struggle within him was nearing its peak. In the heart of Mount Doom, invisible to all but the eye of Sauron, Frodo stood on the precipice of the chasm. The ring's power surged through him, its whispers promising him dominion, control, and escape from all suffering. He could feel it pulling at his soul, urging him to wield its power and become master of all. "You cannot resist me, Frodo Baggins," the ring seemed to say, its voice seductive and overwhelming. "You are mine. I am your destiny." Frodo's mind was a storm of conflict. He had carried the ring for so long, endured its endless torment, and now, at the very end of his journey, the power it offered seemed too great to cast aside. His hand clutched the ring tightly, his knuckles white with the strain. He could feel Sauron's presence pressing down on him, the eye focused on him alone. That eye and that moment, the weight of everything he had endured, every loss, every step, every temptation, seemed to come crashing down. Could he truly let it go? Could he destroy the one thing that had consumed his life, knowing that with it would go all the promises of power and control? Or was he too far gone, too entangled in the ring's web to break free? Tears streamed down Frodo's face as he stood at the edge of the cracks of doom, his mind torn between the lure of the ring and the knowledge that destroying it was the only way to save Middle-earth. He remembered Gandalf's words from long ago, the warning that the ring could corrupt even the purest of hearts. And yet, he also remembered the hope that had carried him this far, the hope that there was still good in the world, something worth fighting for. As he stood on the brink of his decision, Gollum appeared, emerging from the shadows with wild, desperate eyes. His obsession with the ring had brought him here, and he could sense that his precious was close, so close he could taste it. "No!" Gollum hissed, his voice a frantic whisper. "You can't have it. It's mine. My precious. Give it to me." In an instant, Gollum leaped at Frodo, his frail but vicious body colliding with the invisible hobbit. The two of them struggled, wrestling on the narrow ledge of the chasm as the ring dangled precariously between them. Gollum's eyes were filled with madness, his single-minded desire to reclaim the ring driving him to madness. The fight was brutal and desperate. Frodo fought with all his might, but Gollum, driven by pure obsession, bit down on Frodo's finger, severing it from his hand. With a cry of triumph, Gollum grasped the ring, his eyes gleaming with a twisted joy. "My precious!" Gollum cried, holding the ring aloft, his moment of victory finally at hand. But in his delirium, Gollum lost his balance, tumbling backward into the fiery chasm below. As he fell, clutching the ring to his chest, his scream echoed through the chamber, disappearing into the molten depths of Mount Doom. Frodo collapsed to the ground, gasping in pain and disbelief. The ring was gone. Destroyed. The burden that had consumed his soul for so long was lifted, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Frodo felt freed. In that moment, a great cry echoed across Middle-earth. Sauron's eye, fixed on Mount Doom, trembled and shook, realizing too late that the ring had been destroyed. His power, tied so deeply to the fate of the ring, began to unravel. The Dark Lord's hold over the world shattered, and his armies, sensing the fall of their master, faltered and crumbled. The Black Gate, Aragorn, and the forces of the Free Peoples felt the shift in the air. The very ground beneath them seemed to tremble as the power of Sauron disintegrated. The Nazgul let out shrieks of terror, their connection to the ring severed, and they fled into the sky, lost without their master's guidance. Gandalf, standing amidst the chaos, raised his staff high, a beacon of light in the darkness. "The ring is destroyed," he called, his voice carrying over the battlefield. "Sauron's reign has ended." A great cheer rose from the ranks of men, elves, and dwarves as they realized what had happened. The Dark Lord was defeated. Middle-earth was free, but for Frodo, there was no celebration, only a quiet, bittersweet peace. Sam rushed to his side, tears in his eyes as he helped his friend to his feet. Together, they gazed into the fires of Mount Doom, knowing that the greatest battle had been fought and won. The final confrontation had come, and with the destruction of the ring, the age of Sauron had ended. Middle-earth, scarred but unbroken, would begin to heal. The air within Mount Doom was thick with heat and the stench of sulfur, its fiery depths roaring below like the mouth of an unforgiving abyss. Frodo and Sam stood on the ledge of the cracks of Doom, both weakened by their long journey, but aware that the end was in sight. The ring, heavy around Frodo's neck, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its sinister whisper louder than ever before. As they approached the very heart of the mountain, where the molten lava churned beneath them, Frodo stopped. He gazed down into the chasm, the weight of the task before him pressing into his soul. The ring was his to destroy, but the closer he came to fulfilling his mission, the harder it became to let it go. Sam, though exhausted, urged him forward. "This is it, Mr. Frodo," he said softly, placing a hand on Frodo's shoulder. "We've come all this way. Now's the time, throw it in. End it." Frodo stared at Sam, but his eyes were distant, as though he were no longer present in the moment. The ring's pull had grown too strong, its seductive power too irresistible. He held it up, gazing into its depths, mesmerized by the glint of gold. The ring whispered promises of power, control, and salvation, filling his mind with visions of grandeur. Every step he had taken, every sacrifice he had made, seemed to converge in this one choice: to let the ring go, or to claim it as his own. In that moment, Frodo faltered. His hand tightened around the ring. His expression shifted, as if some inner battle had been won, by the wrong side. He looked at Sam with a strange, cold smile. "The ring is mine," Frodo declared, his voice full of possession and resolve. Sam's face fell, disbelief and horror creeping over him. "No, Mr. Frodo," he cried. "Don't let it take you." But it was too late. Frodo slipped the ring onto his finger and disappeared from sight, leaving Sam alone on the precipice, helpless. The very air in the chamber shifted as Sauron's eye turned its full attention toward the mountain. The Dark Lord now knew the ring's exact location. The invisible Frodo stood on the brink, consumed by the ring's power, his will shattered under the weight of its influence. Suddenly, a shrill, maniacal laughter echoed through the chamber. Out of the shadows, Gollum emerged, his eyes wild and hungry. He had followed them all the way to Mount Doom, driven by his insatiable obsession with the ring. And now, he had found his chance. "My precious!" Gollum hissed, leaping toward the invisible Frodo with frenzied desperation. In a sudden struggle, the two fought on the narrow ledge. Gollum's frail but wiry frame wrestled with Frodo, who was still cloaked in the ring's invisibility. Their fight was desperate and chaotic, both driven by the desire to possess the ring, Frodo to keep it, and Gollum to reclaim it. They grappled violently, teetering on the edge of the fiery chasm. Sam could only watch, unable to intervene as the horrific scene unfolded before him. Gollum, consumed by madness and greed, bit down on Frodo's hand, severing his finger. With a scream of triumph, Gollum held the ring aloft, his eyes filled with unbridled joy. "Mine!" Gollum cried, his voice shrill and victorious. "My precious is mine at last." But his victory was short-lived. In his ecstatic delirium, Gollum lost his footing and stumbled backward, plummeting into the molten depths below. His scream echoed through the cavern as he fell, clutching the ring tightly to his chest. The ring, the source of so much pain and destruction, disappeared into the fiery abyss with Gollum. Frodo collapsed to the ground, gasping in pain from his severed finger. His eyes were wide with disbelief, a mixture of shock and relief washing over him. It was over. The ring was gone, destroyed at last, not by an act of will, but by the very greed and desire that had consumed Gollum. Gollum and the ring were consumed by the fires of Mount Doom. A great shift occurred across Middle-earth. Sauron's eye, once all-seeing and all-knowing, began to tremble and falter. The Dark Lord's connection to the ring had been severed, and without it, his power collapsed in on itself. His armies, driven by his will, suddenly found themselves leaderless and confused. The Tower of Barad-dûr, the symbol of his tyranny, began to crumble, and the shadow over the land began to lift. The Black Gate, Aragorn, Gandalf, and the armies of the free peoples could feel the shift in the wind. The power of Sauron, once overwhelming and suffocating, was now fading. The sky, once darkened by his presence, began to clear, and the forces of Mordor, sensing their master's fall, scattered in disarray. But even as Sauron's empire collapsed, the cost of the ring's destruction weighed heavily on Frodo and Sam. Frodo, weakened by the ordeal, looked at Sam with tears in his eyes. "I tried, Sam," he whispered. "I tried to destroy it, but in the end, I couldn't. It took hold of me." Sam knelt beside him, his own eyes filled with sorrow. "It's all right, Mr. Frodo," he said softly. "It's gone now. It's over. You did what you could, and that's all that matters." The two hobbits, exhausted and broken, sat together at the edge of the chasm, watching as the fires of Mount Doom raged below. Gollum's final act of betrayal had brought about the end of the ring, but it had also shown them the terrible cost of desire and greed. The ring had consumed everyone who had come into contact with it, from Smeagol to Boromir to Frodo himself. In the end, the destruction of the ring was not a triumph of willpower or heroism, it was the culmination of the very forces of corruption that the ring represented. Gollum, driven by his obsession, had sacrificed everything for the ring, only to lose it in the fires of Mount Doom. His greed had been his undoing, but it had also been the final act that ensured the end of Sauron's reign. Frodo and Sam, though free of the ring's burden, were forever changed by their journey. The lessons of betrayal, sacrifice, and the consuming nature of desire would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As they sat together, watching the world around them begin to heal, they knew that the battle was over, but the scars would remain. The fires of Mount Doom had cooled, and with the destruction of the One Ring, the shadow of Sauron had lifted from Middle-earth. The landscape of Mordor, once dark and oppressive, seemed to breathe with the possibility of renewal. As the ground settled and the skies cleared, the world felt as though it was exhaling after centuries of tension and fear. Frodo and Sam, exhausted and worn, lay on a rocky outcrop, gazing into the sky. The heat of the volcano had subsided, leaving the air eerily still. Though their bodies were frail and their spirits burdened by the weight of their journey, they could feel the release in the air, a weight lifting from the world. "We did it, Sam," Frodo whispered, his voice faint and weary. "It's over." Sam, lying beside him, smiled through his exhaustion. "Yes, Mr. Frodo. It's over. The ring is gone." But even as he spoke those words, his thoughts turned to the future. They had survived this terrible ordeal, but what lay ahead? What would become of them, of Middle-earth, now that Sauron had been defeated? In the distance, the eagles came, great majestic creatures, summoned by Gandalf, who had sensed that the time had come to bring Frodo and Sam to safety. As they soared down toward the two hobbits, the world around them seemed to shift into a dreamlike state, the edges of reality blurring as the pain and struggle of their journey gave way to rest. The next thing Frodo knew, he awoke in a soft bed. Sunlight streamed through an open window, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and earth. He blinked, confused, wondering if it had all been a dream. But then, he saw the familiar face of Gandalf sitting beside him, his eyes full of warmth and wisdom. "You've done it, Frodo," Gandalf said softly, his voice full of pride and gratitude. "The ring is gone. Sauron's reign is at an end." Frodo sat up slowly, his body still aching from the long journey, but the relief in his heart was palpable. As he looked around, he saw his friends, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, sitting nearby, all smiling at him with tearful eyes. They had all made it through, and now, they were safe. The world outside was changing. Word of the ring's destruction had spread across Middle-earth. In Gondor, the great city of Minas Tirith stood proudly, no longer under siege. Aragorn had taken his rightful place as king, the ancient line of Númenor restored. His coronation had been a moment of joy and renewal, a symbol of hope for all the peoples of Middle-earth. The white tree of Gondor, long dormant, had begun to bloom again, a sign that life was returning to the land. Yet, even in this time of hope and renewal, there was an undeniable sense of loss. The price of the victory had been high. Boromir was gone, having sacrificed himself for the Fellowship. Gandalf had fallen in Moria, only to return through the grace of the Vala. And though the physical scars would heal, the emotional and spiritual toll of the journey weighed heavily on all who had played their part. Frodo, in particular, felt the burden of what had been lost. The ring had taken a piece of him, a part of his soul that he knew could never fully be restored. Though the world was healing, and though peace had returned to Middle-earth, he would always carry the weight of his experiences. Sitting quietly in the peaceful gardens of Minas Tirith, Frodo reflected on what they had achieved. There was joy in seeing the kingdoms of men, elves, and dwarves unite in peace. There was hope in the blooming fields and the laughter of children, once silenced by war. But there was also sorrow in remembering those who had not lived to see this new age. Sam, ever the optimist, joined him on a bench, looking out at the peaceful city below. "We've been through a lot, Mr. Frodo," he said softly. "But look at the world now. It's like something out of a dream, isn't it?" Frodo smiled at his friend. "Yes, Sam. It is. But it came at a cost." Sam nodded, his eyes thoughtful. That it did. But I reckon that's the way of things. Some things are worth fighting for, even if it costs us dear." Frodo looked at Sam, appreciating his unshakable loyalty and wisdom. Sam had been his rock throughout the entire journey, and now, in this time of peace, he would continue to be a source of strength and hope. The peace of the new age spread across Middle-earth. In the Shire, life returned to its simple, joyful rhythm. The hobbits who had fought in the Great War returned home to rebuild their lives, their hearts full of the tales they would tell for generations to come. The Shire, untouched by the war, remained a beacon of simplicity and purity, a place where Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin could finally rest and heal. Yet for Frodo, the Shire no longer felt the same. Though he loved the rolling hills and the quiet rivers, he had changed. The scars of the ring, both physical and emotional, had left him feeling out of place in the world he once knew. And so, after a time, he made the decision to leave Middle-earth behind, sailing to the Undying Lands with Gandalf, Elrond, and the last of the great elves. It was a choice made not out of sorrow, but out of a need for peace and healing that could not be found in the mortal lands. As Frodo departed, Sam stood on the shores of Middle-earth, watching the ship sail away. Though his heart ached at the parting, he knew that Frodo had found the peace he deserved. And with that knowledge, Sam turned back toward the Shire, ready to build a life of his own. The new age had dawned. Sauron was gone, the ring was destroyed, and peace had returned to Middle-earth. But the memories of the journey, of the sacrifices made and the friendships forged, would live on in the hearts of those who had fought for the freedom of the world. Though the scars of war would never fully fade, hope had been restored. And in that hope, a new future was born. The great wars of Middle-earth had come to an end, and the shadow of Sauron had been lifted from the land. Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, having played their parts in the defeat of evil, now found themselves on the long road back to the Shire. The journey home felt different from the one they had embarked on all those months ago. The world was still beautiful, but it was quieter now, as if the earth itself was taking a deep breath after all the tumult and destruction. As they traveled, there was a sense of relief and peace among the four hobbits, but also a deep sense of change. Each of them had been transformed by their adventures. They had seen the vastness of Middle-earth, met kings, wizards, and warriors, and fought in battles that would become the stuff of legend. Now, they were returning to the simple life of the Shire, where the green hills, peaceful rivers, and quiet villages awaited them, yet, for Frodo, the road home was bittersweet. As they rode through the lush, green countryside, passing by familiar trees and rivers, Frodo found himself feeling a strange detachment. The beauty of the Shire was undeniable, yet it no longer brought him the same sense of comfort and joy it once had. He gazed out over the fields, where farmers were already tending to their crops, unaware of the great struggles that had taken place beyond their borders. Life had continued on in the Shire, untouched by the darkness that had gripped the rest of the world. Sam, riding beside him, couldn't help but notice Frodo's quiet demeanor. "We're almost home, Mr. Frodo," he said, trying to lift his friend's spirits. "Back to the Shire, back to peace and quiet." Frodo smiled at Sam's optimism, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Yes, Sam. We're home. But it's strange, I thought coming back would feel like the end of the journey, but instead, it feels like something else." Sam furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean, Mr. Frodo?" Frodo sighed, looking out at the rolling hills ahead. "The Shire hasn't changed, Sam. It's still as beautiful as ever. But I've changed. We all have. I don't feel like I belong here anymore, not the way I used to." Sam was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words. "We've been through a lot, Mr. Frodo. But the Shire's still our home. It always will be." Frodo nodded, but deep down, he knew that his connection to the Shire had been altered by the burden of the ring. He had carried the weight of its evil for so long that it had left a mark on him, one that even the peace and tranquility of the Shire couldn't erase. The memories of the journey, of the battles fought and the friends lost, stayed with him like shadows that wouldn't fade. As they neared Hobbiton, the familiar sights of home began to appear, the winding road leading to Bag End, the small cottages dotting the hillside, the comforting smell of wood smoke drifting through the air. Merry and Pippin were already talking excitedly about the feasts and celebrations they would have, eager to share their stories with the other hobbits. But Frodo's mind was elsewhere. When they finally reached Bag End, Frodo paused at the front gate, looking up at the round door and the familiar garden. Sam, sensing Frodo's hesitation, gently placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You've been through a lot, Mr. Frodo," Sam said softly. "But this is still your home. We can find peace here again." Frodo smiled at Sam, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thank you, Sam. You've been with me through everything. I couldn't have done any of it without you." As the days passed, the Shire welcomed the returning heroes with open arms. Merry and Pippin, having grown taller and stronger during their time away, were hailed as great warriors, and Sam was celebrated for his bravery. Yet Frodo remained quiet, his heart heavy with the knowledge that no one in the Shire could truly understand what he had been through. The burden of the ring had left him changed in ways that even his dearest friends could not fully comprehend. As Frodo tried to settle back into the routines of Shire life, he found it increasingly difficult to find peace. Though he loved the Shire, he felt like an outsider in his own home. The wounds from his journey, both physical and emotional, had not fully healed. The weight of the ring's influence still lingered, haunting his dreams and clouding his thoughts. One evening, as Frodo sat quietly in his study, staring at the pages of a blank journal, he realized that his time in the Shire was coming to an end. He had completed his task, and the ring had been destroyed, but he knew that he could never truly leave behind the darkness he had experienced. The Shire was no longer enough to heal him. He turned to Sam, who had come to check on him. "I don't think I belong here anymore, Sam," Frodo said softly. "Not the way you do." Sam, though saddened, nodded in understanding. "You've done more than anyone could have ever asked of you, Mr. Frodo. But if you need to find peace somewhere else, I'll understand." Frodo smiled sadly. "Thank you, Sam. You've always understood." In the days that followed, Frodo made arrangements to leave Middle-earth with Gandalf, Elrond, and the elves, sailing to the Undying Lands where he might finally find the peace he sought. The Shire, though dear to his heart, was no longer the place where he could heal, and so, as he prepared to say goodbye to his friends, Frodo realized that the journey home was not about returning to the life he once knew. It was about understanding that some journeys change you in ways that can never be undone. The Shire would always be a part of him, but his heart had been irrevocably altered by the burdens he had carried. As he sailed into the west, Frodo felt a sense of closure. His journey was complete, and though his time in Middle-earth was over, he knew that Sam, Merry, and Pippin would carry on the legacy of their adventures. The dawn of a new age had begun, and though Frodo would no longer walk the roads of the Shire, he would always remain a part of its story. For the first time in a long while, Frodo felt a glimmer of hope for the peace that awaited him on the distant shores. The Shire would live on, and so would he, in a new, quiet way, far beyond the world he had known. The sun hung low in the sky over the grey havens, casting a soft golden glow on the water. The sea breeze carried with it a quiet peace, but the air was heavy with the weight of farewells. The Fellowship, once united in their quest to destroy the One Ring, had gathered one last time at the western shores of Middle-earth. Their journey together had ended, but the bonds they had forged in fire and darkness would remain forever. Frodo stood at the harbor, gazing out at the white ship that would soon carry him away. The decision to leave Middle-earth had not been easy, but he knew in his heart it was the only way he could find true peace. The scars left by the ring could never fully heal in the Shire, and though he loved his homeland dearly, it no longer felt like the place where he belonged. Beside him stood Sam, his ever-loyal companion, struggling to keep his emotions in check. Sam had always known that Frodo's departure was inevitable, but that didn't make the farewell any easier. "I wish you weren't going, Mr. Frodo," Sam said softly, his voice trembling. "But I understand why you must." Frodo smiled gently, placing a hand on Sam's shoulder. "You've been with me through everything, Sam. There's no one I trust more. But this is a journey I must take alone. You have your own life to live now, with Rosie and your children. The Shire needs you." Sam nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'll never forget you, Mr. Frodo." "You'll never have to," Frodo replied. We'll always be connected, Sam. No matter how far apart we may be." As they embraced, the rest of the fellowship began to gather around, each of them knowing that this was their final meeting as a group. Aragorn, now the King of Gondor, approached Frodo, his eyes full of respect and sorrow. "You have my eternal gratitude, Frodo Baggins," he said solemnly. "Without you, none of this would have been possible." Frodo looked up at Aragorn, seeing the strength and wisdom in his friend's eyes. "You are the true hero, Aragorn. Middle-earth is safe because of you." Aragorn smiled, though his heart was heavy with the knowledge that this was goodbye. "Safe, yes. But the world has also lost a great soul today." Next came Legolas and Gimli, the unlikely friends who had shared in so many battles and hardships. Gimli, always blunt, shook his head in disbelief. "I still don't understand why you're leaving, lad. You've earned your place here in Middle-earth, haven't you?" Frodo chuckled softly. "I have, Gimli, but I think my time here has come to an end. I need to find peace." Legolas, more perceptive of Frodo's inner struggles, placed a hand on Gimli's shoulder. "It is not for us to decide where our hearts find rest, my friend. Frodo's journey has taken him far, and now he seeks the peace he deserves." Frodo smiled gratefully at both of them. "Thank you, Legolas. And thank you, Gimli, for your friendship. I'll miss our adventures." The hobbits, Merry and Pippin, were next to say their goodbyes, though they could barely contain their emotions. They had shared so much with Frodo, from the Shire to the darkest corners of Middle-earth, and the thought of parting with him was almost too much to bear. "I can't believe you're really leaving us, Frodo," Merry said, his voice thick with emotion. "It feels like just yesterday we were sitting by the fire in Bag End." Pippin, usually the more light-hearted of the two, was quiet for once, tears welling in his eyes. "We'll miss you, Frodo. The Shire won't be the same without you." Frodo embraced them both. "You'll be fine. The Shire is in good hands with the two of you to look after it. I'll miss you too, but we'll always carry our memories with us." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Gandalf approached, his staff in hand and a gentle smile on his face. "It is time, Frodo," the wizard said softly. "The ship is ready." Frodo nodded, knowing that this was the moment he had been both dreading and anticipating. He turned to the fellowship one last time, his heart full of gratitude and love for the friends who had stood by him through everything. "I couldn't have asked for better companions," he said, his voice full of emotion. "Thank you, all of you, for everything." The group stood in silence for a moment, each of them reflecting on the long and arduous journey they had shared. They had faced impossible odds, fought against the forces of darkness, and emerged victorious. But now, it was time to part ways. With one last glance at his friends, Frodo stepped aboard the ship, followed by Gandalf, Elrond, and the other elves who had chosen to leave Middle-earth. As the sails were raised and the ship began to glide across the water, Frodo stood at the bow, looking back at the shores of Middle-earth. The Shire, the Fellowship, and all the lands he had come to know were fading from view, but he felt no sadness, only a deep sense of peace. On the shore, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli watched as the ship disappeared into the horizon, the last light of the sun catching on its white sails. Though their hearts were heavy with sorrow, they knew that Frodo had found the peace he sought. As the ship sailed westward, Frodo felt the weight of his burdens lift. The journey of the ring had come to an end, and with it, the pain and darkness he had carried for so long. He was free now, sailing toward a new beginning. The Fellowship, once united by a shared quest, was now scattered across Middle-earth, each member embarking on their own path. But the bond between them could never be broken. The friendships they had forged in the fires of battle and hardship would endure, even across the vastness of time and space. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Sam stood silently, watching the sea. Though he knew that Frodo was gone, he also knew that their friendship would never fade. And with that thought, he turned back toward the Shire, ready to begin the next chapter of his own life. A new age had dawned in Middle-earth, an age of peace, hope, and new beginnings. And though the Fellowship had parted ways, their story would live on forever in the hearts of those who remembered their courage, their sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. The warm light of the afternoon sun bathed the rolling hills of the Shire as Frodo approached his old home, Bag End. From the outside, nothing seemed to have changed. The familiar green doors, the lush gardens, and the quaint cobblestone paths looked as peaceful as ever. But Frodo knew that the Shire, and he himself, had been irrevocably changed. After the destruction of the ring. Frodo had hoped to return to the life he had once known. The simple joys of the Shire, the quiet peace of Bag End, and the comfort of familiar faces. Yet, as he walked through the streets of Hobbiton, something in his heart felt different. The world had been saved from the darkness of Sauron, but the shadow of the ring still lingered in his soul. Hobbits went about their daily business as usual, but there was a subtle undercurrent of awareness in the air. Word had spread of Frodo's adventure, and though many hobbits couldn't comprehend the true gravity of what had happened in the wider world, they knew that Frodo Baggins had played a crucial role in it. They regarded him with admiration and quiet respect, yet Frodo felt more distant from his neighbors than ever. When he finally arrived at Bag End, Sam was waiting for him at the gate. The sight of his loyal friend brought a smile to Frodo's face, and for a moment, he felt a sense of normalcy return. Sam had always been his constant, and now, as the Shire began to rebuild and heal, Sam's presence was a reminder that some things, at least, had not changed. "Welcome home, Mr. Frodo," Sam said with a warm smile. "The Shire's been waiting for you." Frodo looked around, taking in the familiar sights of the place he had always called home. But even as he stood on the doorstep of Bag End, the weight of his journey clung to him. "It's good to be back, Sam," he replied softly. "But I don't think I'll ever see the Shire the same way again." Sam's expression grew somber. It's been through a lot, and so have you. But the Shire's peaceful again, thanks to you." Frodo nodded, though a part of him couldn't shake the lingering unease. He had saved the Shire, yes, but at what cost? The burden of the ring had left scars deeper than any visible wound. Though the peace of the Shire had been restored, Frodo couldn't help but feel disconnected from it, as though he no longer belonged. As the days passed, Frodo tried to settle back into life at Bag End. He spent time with Sam, Merry, Pippin, and the other hobbits, enjoying the simple pleasures of home, warm fires, good food, and laughter. But even in these moments of joy, Frodo felt a sense of detachment. The legacy of the ring haunted him, its whispers still echoing in the back of his mind. The Shire itself, though peaceful, was not entirely untouched by the events that had transpired. News of the great battles in the wider world had reached even this quiet corner of Middle-earth, and while the hobbits carried on with their lives, there was a newfound awareness that the world beyond the Shire was vast and dangerous. As Frodo walked through the fields and meadows, he noticed small changes. The people were more watchful, the young hobbits more curious about the outside world. The Shire, though still a place of peace and simplicity, was no longer the untouched haven it once was. The impact of the ring's destruction had rippled across all of Middle-earth, even reaching here. One evening, as Frodo sat quietly in his study, writing in the Red Book, Sam came to visit him. Sam had been busy with his own family, but he always made time for Frodo, knowing that his friend was still struggling with the past. "You've done more than anyone could have asked, Mr. Frodo," Sam said gently, sitting across from him. "You gave up everything to save Middle-earth, and the Shire will always be grateful for that." Frodo sighed, setting down his quill. "I know, Sam. But sometimes, it feels like I lost something of myself along the way. The ring may be gone, but it's left a mark on me." Sam, ever the optimist, smiled encouragingly. "That mark doesn't take away from the good you've done, Frodo. You brought peace back to the Shire. And even if things aren't exactly the same, you can still find peace here too." Frodo looked out the window, the golden light of the sunset casting a warm glow over the hills. He wanted to believe Sam's words, but the truth was, he still felt like a stranger in his own home. The peace of the Shire was beautiful, but it could not erase the weight of the journey he had undertaken or the sacrifices he had made. As the days turned into weeks, Frodo began to accept that while the Shire had been saved, his own peace would have to be found elsewhere. He continued to write in the Red Book, documenting the journey of the Ring and the Fellowship, ensuring that their story would never be forgotten. The Shire, for all its changes, was thriving once again. Sam, Merry, Pippin, and the other hobbits carried on with their lives, each of them finding happiness and fulfillment in their own way. The Shire's legacy of peace would continue for generations to come, but for Frodo, the time had come to acknowledge that his place in Middle-earth had come to an end. The Shire, though dear to him, no longer felt like home. He had been part of something far greater than the quiet life he had once known, and the scars of that journey could not be healed here. In his heart, Frodo knew that his peace lay beyond the shores of Middle-earth. The time had come to say goodbye, not just to the ring, but to the Shire itself. As he prepared to leave, Frodo felt a sense of calm settle over him. He had done his part, and now it was time to find the peace he so desperately sought. The Shire would always hold a special place in his heart, but his journey had taken him far beyond its borders, and so, with a final glance at the green hills of the Shire, Frodo made his peace with the past and prepared for the next chapter of his journey. The golden hues of autumn were beginning to settle over the Shire. The air was crisp, and the leaves were turning shades of amber and red, falling gently in the soft breeze. Frodo sat alone in the quiet garden of Bag End, watching the world go by. It was peaceful, just as he had always known it, but the peace of the Shire did little to quiet the unrest in his heart. The journey to destroy the One Ring had left him with more than just memories, it had left wounds that could not be seen. These unseen wounds festered in his soul, reminding him of the darkness he had faced and the burden he had carried for so long. Though the ring was gone, its hold on him had not entirely faded. Frodo often woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the weight of invisible chains pulling at his mind. He would feel the absence of the ring in a way that made him long for its presence, even though he knew the evil it represented. He had thrown it into the fires of Mount Doom, but its whispers still haunted him. He sought comfort in the company of his friends, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, but even their warmth could not reach the part of him that had been scarred by the ring's influence. He could smile, laugh, and engage in conversations, but there was always a hollow feeling deep within him. No matter how hard he tried to return to the life he once had, it felt just out of reach, like a distant memory fading with time. Sam, ever observant of his master, began to notice the toll the journey had taken on Frodo. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Sam spoke softly, trying to breach the unspoken barrier that had grown between them since their return. "Mr. Frodo, are you all right? You've been quieter than usual these days." Frodo paused, his hand resting on the spade he had been using to dig in the soil. He looked up at Sam, seeing the concern in his friend's eyes. "I'm fine, Sam. It's just, some days are harder than others." Sam set down his tools and moved closer. "I understand, Mr. Frodo. What we went through, what you went through, it's not something that can be forgotten easily." Frodo sighed, looking out over the peaceful hills of the Shire. "I want to forget, Sam. I want to move on, but the memories, they stay with me. The ring, it's like it never really left. Even now, I feel its shadow." Sam nodded solemnly, understanding more than Frodo realized. "It's not easy, Mr. Frodo. Healing takes time, but you don't have to do it alone. We're all here for you, me, Merry, Pippin, we've all been through our own trials. And we'll get through this together." Frodo smiled faintly, though the weight in his heart remained. He knew Sam meant well, and his loyalty was unwavering, but this was a burden Frodo felt he had to bear alone. The ring had touched him in ways it had not touched the others. They had not carried it, had not felt its power calling to them with every step. As the days passed, Frodo became increasingly introspective. He spent hours alone, writing in the Red Book, chronicling every detail of their journey to destroy the ring. It was a form of therapy, a way to relive the moments that haunted him, but also to honor the sacrifices that had been made. He wrote of the bravery of Sam, the courage of Merry and Pippin, and the wisdom of Gandalf. But when it came to writing about himself, Frodo hesitated. How could he convey the deep conflict he had felt? The temptation he had nearly succumbed to. One evening, after a particularly long day of writing, Frodo felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow wash over him. He had reached the part of the story where they had stood at the very edge of Mount Doom, and he had claimed the ring for himself. The memory of that moment, when he had failed to resist its power, weighed heavily on his heart. He had been saved not by his own strength, but by Gollum's madness and desire. As he stared at the pages before him, Frodo felt a sudden wave of guilt. He had been the ring-bearer, and yet, in the end, he had not been strong enough. It was a truth he had carried with him since that day, one that gnawed at him constantly. He closed the book and leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing as the memories threatened to overwhelm him. In the quiet of Bag End, Frodo's mind wandered back to the many nights he had spent alone on the road, feeling the weight of the ring growing heavier with each passing day. He remembered the sleepless nights, the dark whispers that had tempted him to put it on and give in to its power. He had resisted for so long, but in the end, the ring had nearly claimed him. It was not the physical journey that had taken the greatest toll on Frodo, but the mental and emotional one. The ring had left an indelible mark on his soul, and no amount of time in the peaceful Shire could erase it. Yet, even in his darkest moments, Frodo understood the importance of remembrance. It was not just his story, but the story of everyone who had fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. The memories of Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir deserved to be honored, as did the countless lives that had been lost in the battle against Sauron. The story of the Ring, of the Fellowship, was not just about pain and struggle, it was about hope and resilience. Frodo realized that healing did not mean forgetting. The scars would always be there, but they were a testament to what had been endured and overcome. He might never fully recover from the burden of the ring, but he could find peace in knowing that he had played his part in saving Middle-earth, and so, Frodo continued to write, pouring his heart into the Red Book, not only for himself but for those who would come after him. He knew that one day, someone would read his words and remember the courage of the Fellowship and the sacrifices that had been made. The unseen wounds would never truly heal, but in writing, Frodo found a way to honor them. Through remembrance, he could keep the light of hope alive, even in the darkest of places. And though his journey in Middle-earth was drawing to a close, the legacy of the Ring, and of the Fellowship, would live on forever. The gentle waves of the sea lapped against the shores of the Grey Havens as Frodo stood at the edge of the dock, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the scent of salt and the promise of distant lands. The white ships of the elves stood ready, their sails gleaming in the sunlight, waiting to carry the last of the ring-bearers across the sea to the undying lands. Frodo felt a sense of calm as he stood there, surrounded by those who had been with him through so much, Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, and most importantly, Sam. It was a moment he had long anticipated, and though there was a twinge of sadness in his heart, he knew that his time in Middle-earth had come to an end. But with that ending came the dawn of a new age, not only for him but for the whole world. As the last rays of the setting sun illuminated the horizon, Frodo thought of the countless stories that would continue long after he had left Middle-earth. Though his own journey was complete, Middle-earth would endure, its lands filled with new adventures, new challenges, and new heroes yet to be born. The light of Erendel, which he still carried, glowed faintly from his pocket. The phial given to him by Galadriel, with the light of the star Erendel captured within it, had guided him through some of his darkest moments. Now, it served as a symbol of hope, not just for Frodo, but for all of Middle-earth. As long as that light existed, there would always be hope. Even in the darkest of times, standing beside him, Sam looked out at the same horizon, his heart heavy with the knowledge that Frodo was leaving. Though Sam's loyalty had never wavered, and he had stood by Frodo through every hardship, this was a journey he could not follow. "You'll be all right, Sam," Frodo said softly, sensing his friend's sorrow. "The Shire needs you, and you've done more for me than I could ever repay." Sam nodded, though his eyes were filled with tears. "I know, Mr. Frodo. But it won't be the same without you." Frodo smiled gently, placing a hand on Sam's shoulder. "The world is full of stories, Sam, and yours is just beginning. There will be new adventures, new friendships, and new tales to be told. The light of Erendel will guide you when the way seems uncertain." Sam took comfort in Frodo's words, though the thought of saying goodbye was still difficult. He had always believed that their story would end together, but now he understood that some journeys must be taken alone. "I'll keep the Shire safe for you, Mr. Frodo," Sam promised, his voice steady despite the emotion in his heart. Frodo nodded, knowing that the Shire was in the best possible hands. Sam had grown so much since the start of their journey, no longer just a simple gardener, but a true leader and protector of their homeland. The future of the Shire was bright, and Frodo had no doubt that Sam would ensure its peace. As Frodo prepared to board the ship, he thought of the others, the Fellowship, scattered across Middle-earth, each embarking on their own paths. Aragorn had taken his rightful place as King of Gondor, bringing strength and hope to his people. Legolas and Gimli, their unlikely friendship forged in battle, had set off on their own adventures, exploring new lands and finding peace in their bond. And Merry and Pippin, who had once been carefree and full of mischief, had grown into brave and wise leaders, their stories now entwined with the fate of Rohan and Gondor. The future of Middle-earth was bright, filled with the promise of new tales, new heroes, and new challenges. The shadow of Sauron had passed, but Middle-earth would never be without its struggles. Yet, with the strength of those who remained, there was hope for a world rebuilt in peace and harmony. As Frodo took his place on the ship, the sails unfurling and the wind catching them, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had fulfilled his part in the great story of Middle-earth, and now it was time for him to rest. But even as he sailed toward the undying lands, he knew that Middle-earth would continue to thrive, its future secure in the hands of those who remained. The ship glided smoothly across the water, the coastline of Middle-earth growing smaller in the distance. Frodo stood at the bow, watching as the world he had known faded into the horizon. He thought of all the people he had met, the places he had been, and the lessons he had learned. Though his journey had been filled with hardship, he knew it had also been filled with love, friendship, and hope. As the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, the stars began to appear in the sky. Frodo gazed up at them, his heart filled with wonder. The stars of Middle-earth had always been a source of comfort, guiding him through the darkest of times. Now, as he sailed into the unknown, they would continue to guide those he left behind. The light of Erendel, still glowing softly in his hand, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of places, light could always be found. The future of Middle-earth was bright, and though Frodo would no longer be there to see it, he knew that the world would carry on, full of new stories, new adventures, and new heroes. As the ship sailed toward the undying lands, Frodo allowed himself to close his eyes, a smile on his face. The journey was over, but the story of Middle-earth would never truly end. There would always be hope, and as long as the light of Erendel shone, there would always be the promise of a new day. Middle-earth's future was secure, and its people would continue to write the stories that would shape its destiny for generations to come.